static building in the air as he peeled his sweat-soaked sparring shirt off his back. Storms have always had a special space in his heart. The exhilaration of casting foul mine is for the first time still embedded firmly in his memory, but he hasn't seen Rayla since she disappeared to wash up, and he wonders if the anticipation building in his system is truly because of the incoming gale. He'd tried not to worry about it. Rayla can take care of herself, and she's been doing so much better these past couple of days. Her smiles have been wider, her eyes warmer, and while she's still not as accepting of his affection as she was before, everything feels like it's finally stabilizing after the horrendous mess it has been this past week and a half. All Callum wants is for her to be happy again, and he'd thought they were making good progress towards that, but something irks him. There's something not quite right about the fact that she didn't come back after she washed up. He waits outside her bedroom door now, wondering if he should knock or if she might appear at dinner on her own, but his curiosity gets the better of him, and he raps his knuckles lightly against the wood. "Rayla? You in there?" She doesn't answer. He frowns, waiting a moment longer before he knocks again. "Hey, is everything okay?" The door creaks open. Callum feels relief well in his chest at the sight of her for reasons he doesn't really know how to explain. She's pretty in the dimming light, silver hair damp and tousled, towels slung haphazardly around her shoulders to keep her shirt dry, but there's a redness in the whites of her eyes that stops him short. He takes a second to study her, really study her, and the hollow smile she greets him with along with the stiffness of her movements. "Hey," she greets. Her voice is hoarse and she doesn't quite look at him. "Sorry, I lost track of time." It's a lie and he knows it. She knows that he knows it, he can see it in the way that she winces. "Rayla," he starts, pushing gently against the door. "Rayla, what happened?" She shakes her head at him. "Nothing," she says, her voice cracking just a little on the first syllable. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." Also a lie. She's been using it for days, and Callum knows now more than ever how really not fine things are. He's only ever seen her cry a handful of times over the 3 years they've been traveling together, but he knows the signs of it when he sees them. The redness in her eyes, the hoarseness of her voice, the way her breath shakes when she breathes in. She'd been crying, and Callum's heart clenches in his chest. He swallows and pushes the door open the rest of the way before he can even think about what he's doing. Her reaction is immediate. She shrinks away from him, keeps her hands curled against her chest and out of his reach like she knows all he wants to do is pull her close. Callum hesitates. "Rayla," he manages. "Talk to me, what's going on?" "Nothing," says Rayla, but the panic is starting to show in her voice and on her face. She swallows. "I'm fine, Callum, let's just go to dinner, okay?" He's not fooled, and he presses forward until her back bumps against the wall and there's nowhere else for her to go. He's starting to panic too, because she's been crying and he doesn't know what to do. He can't understand why she won't let him help, can't fathom why she won't even talk to him. "Rayla, please," he tries again, his own voice cracking now. He clutches at her hands, trying to remind her that he's there, she's not alone, that, whatever it is, he can take it. "Please. Don't lie to me. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me what I can do to help you." "You can't," she gasps. She tears her hands from his grip, but he's too close now. She falters. Callum, you can't." "Why?" he demands, heart hammering painfully against his ribs. To hell with what everyone else might think, he thinks. She's been crying and his only want right now is to make it better. His instincts getting the better of him, his hands cupping her cheeks, her face so close to his that he can feel the raggedness of her breath against his lips. "Why can't I help you? Why won't you let me?" She shakes her head, tries to pull his hands from her face, but it's half-hearted and weak, like she wants to let him in and just doesn't know how. "I can't, it's complicated, Callum, please." "Hey," he whispers. "Hey, it's okay, you can tell me, I swear to you, Rayla, whatever it is, we can work it out." He tilts her face towards him, presses his forehead against hers to remind her again, "I'm here, it's okay, I can take it," even if the words don't quite make it past his lips. But she shakes her head. "Not this time," she murmurs, her resolve crumbling at last. Her tears are warm against his thumbs, and Callum forgets how to breathe because Rayla is the strongest person he knows, and her, broken, like this, feels like it could break him too. There's a lump in his throat, and his heart is racing so fast it feels like he might faint. "What do you mean?" he asks, voice cracking because he's afraid of what the answer might be. She snorts, rueful, tired, heartbroken. "We're just friends," she whispers. "What?" "We're just friends," she manages again. "That's all we're supposed to be, and Callum," she pulls free from him with a gasp, anguish on her face, fear in her eyes, heartache so clear she doesn't even have to finish the sentence. Callum feels his stomach drop through the floor. No. She couldn't have been, not this whole time, because that would mean. "Rayla," he breathes. I can't be here," she chokes. "I can't. I'm sorry." "Rayla, wait." She turns. She runs. She doesn't look back. Rayla doesn't really know where she wants to go, but her feet take her to the stables. She'd considered, briefly, the North Tower, but Callum knows that she likes it up there and, for once, she doesn't want him near her. It's too much. She's in enough pain without him trying to fix a problem he can't fix, and at least here, there's a lower likelihood of being interrupted by someone else. Vorobei nickers when she sees her, and Rayla rubs her eyes with the heels of her hand before she offers the Philly a sad smile. "Hey," she greets quietly. "I hope you don't mind some company." Vorobei snorts gently, snuffling at her hair and her ears with an affection that needs no explicit translation. She sighs against her, hands rubbing absently at her mane. The ambience here is pleasant, it's quiet, but not uncomfortably so, the gentle hush of the rain and occasional braying horse a welcome change to the silence in her own bedroom. She gets all of 2 minutes to herself before the stable doors swing open. Rayla's breath hitches, but it's Ezran's voice that calls through quiet. "Rayla." She sighs, shoulders sagging in relief. "Hey," as she mumbles as he appears at the stall door. He stares at her, concern obvious in his eyes before he even asks. "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" Rayla swallows, but she's miserable already, and Ezran's known from the beginning so there's no real reason to lie. She sniffles. She coughs to clear the lump growing in her throat. Callum knows. His eyes widen. "What? Please tell me he didn't say anything stupid." "I didn't let him," admits Rayla. She stares at the straw on the stable floor, willing herself not to cry in front of him, but it's too late. It's so hard to breathe, and gods, her chest aches, and she's been holding these feelings in for so long that there's little chance of stopping them now. I couldn't be there," as she croaks. "All he wanted to do was make it better, and he can't, and I couldn't." "Oh, Rayla." Ezran starts forward, tugging her into his embrace before she even has the chance to refuse. He's grown a bit. It's more obvious now than ever, and Rayla buries her face into his shoulder, the floodgates well and truly open. He holds her tight, rubs his hand up and down her back, and Rayla breaks in his arms, anguished sobs racking her body as Ezran whispers words of comfort into her hair. "I don't know what to do," as she whispers, her voice hoarse with remorse. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay, but the idea of not even being friends with him scares me so much, and I can't be here tonight, and I didn't know where else to go." "I know," mutters Ez. "I know, it's okay. You're okay." He nods against her shoulder, and Rayla almost yelps when Vorobei presses her nose into her hair. "Go to the wishbone. I'll let them know you're coming." "Hey, it's gonna be okay, I promise." She snorts in spite of herself. "You can't promise that." "I can," says Ezran firmly, untangling himself from her grasp to take a saddle from the nearest rack. "You'll work this out. You always do." He goes about making Vorobei ready for her when they hear the stable door swing open once more, and Rayla rubs the tears from her eyes in time to see Balan appear at the stall door. "My lady," he says. "I heard you were upset." Rayla doesn't have it in her to be civilized today, and she takes a blade from her back, shoves him against the opposite wall, and presses the sharp end against his throat. He gasps, looking to Ezran for help, but Ezran just shrugs and continues with his work. Rayla snarls at him. "Come near me again, and I'll kill you myself," she snaps. "You wouldn't," manages Balan, trying to sound smug, but the fear in his eyes is obvious even to her. Kill me and the work you've been doing these past 3 years will be for nothing. Like the work we've been doing has ever mattered to you, she seethes. Don't test me, Balin. His voice fails him, and he looks to Ezran again. Why, your majesty, he says. You wouldn't let her. Ezran shrugs a second time as he tightens the strap of Vorobei's saddle. You heard what she said, he says mildly. Don't test her. He leads Vorobei forward by the reins, reaches for Rayla's hand, and tugs her back by her fingers. Go, he says quietly. I'll take care of this. Rayla nods, muttering a thank you to him under her breath as she releases Balin and flicks the blade back into its hilt. She mounts up wordlessly, gives Balin one last disgusted scowl before she clicks her tongue, and she and Vorobei ride off into the night. Notes. I've read through this like 20 times already and I still don't know if it's as emotionally charged as I intended. I hope it came out okay. Chapter 17. Summary. This whole time, she, gods, and I just carried on like nothing was different, but it must have been killing her, and I didn't even notice. He takes a shuddering breath. It's my fault, Ez. She left because of me. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 17. Callum's first instinct is to follow her, but the realization feels like a punch in the gut. She loves him. She loves him. She loves him. The room spins. His breath comes short and shallow, and he slumps onto her bed as he tries to process the idea. How could he not have noticed? The softness in her eyes, the lingering of her fingers on his hands and on his face and in his hair, her reaction to his insistence that they were just friends after Ezran's proposal, the way she's been shying away from his touch. Gods, it's been so obvious, and he'd gone about acting like they were just friends without realizing how much it must have killed her inside to bear his touch and think she meant nothing to him. His chest hurts. His blood pounds in his ears. His hands are shaking and there's something in his gut demanding he do something, anything, to go after her, to tell her that it's going to be okay and that they can work this out. But anything he does will kill her more, and he can't do that to her. He's hurt her enough this past week and a half, and the fact that he hadn't even noticed puts a lump in his throat and a sharp ache in his heart. He forces himself to breathe, to settle, to think, because he can't let her go like this. There has to be something he can do to fix this, to remove the problem altogether, but he's at a loss because he is the problem, and the obvious solution is. He doesn't want to think about it. He's an idiot, he thinks, burying his face in his hands. How could he do this to her? The signs were all there and so obvious. He'd just, what? Had he chosen not to notice them, or was he really just blind? Did he really think that her affection meant nothing? That they could just keep going the way they had been, casual intimacy and all, without consequences? Could he really be that stupid? He can't leave it like this. He doesn't really know what to do, doesn't even really know what to say to her, if he even finds her to begin with, but he can't just sit here. He gets up. He finds Ez in the stables in the middle of a shouting match with Balin. He ducks under the window, afraid to interrupt, but a horse spots him anyway. It pokes its nose through the gap in the glass, snuffling at Callum even as he hides beneath the sill. His lips twitch a little, and he reaches a hand up and pats its nose as he listens to Ez. Summoning General Amaya behind my back. Accusing an elven emissary of having a premarital affair with my brother. Undermining my authority at every turn to stop a marriage that hasn't even been formally arranged. I'm your king, Balin. I asked you a question, what else did you do? It's not even directed at him, and Callum winces. It's unusual for Ez. Callum's seen his brother get mad, but not like this. His voice is commanding and severe, laced with an obvious dislike at a volume Callum didn't even realize Ez was capable of. It reminds him of their father. I did nothing, he hears Balin snap. I only spoke to her, I sympathized with her situation, even. You had no business talking to her about her personal problems, Balin. I'm not an idiot. You did this. How dare you accuse me? How dare I? He hears Ezran let out a hollow laugh, and even from outside and over the heavy rainfall, Callum hears the horses echoing his anger, hooves stamping menacingly against the stable floor. Despite himself, despite his panic and the way his chest aches, Callum makes a silent vow to never make his brother angry again. I am your king, he hears Ez snap again. I've been patient with you because you were loyal to my father, but I'm warning you, I will not be responsible for what happens to you if you even think about going near Rayla again. And if she, for any reason, doesn't give you what's coming to you, I will personally make sure you regret it. Have I made myself clear? Your Majesty. Have I made myself clear? There's a pause, but Callum hears the telltale clanking of an armored bow before Balin mutters, "Yes, my king." "Get out," seethes Ezran. "I want to talk to my brother alone." Callum blinks. He glances up at the horse, still snuffling for his attention, and remembers Ez's connection with animals too late. He huffs and straightens, his clothes heavy with rainwater, his limbs cold and going numb, as the stable door crashes open and Balin storms into the rain. He's red-faced and furious, and he casts a glare at Callum on his way out. He doesn't bow. He only pauses, and then snarls before he trudges across the bailey and back towards the keep. A minute later, Ez appears in the doorway, his face hard, and he beckons Callum out of the rain before he rounds on him. "What happened?" he asks shortly. The pain in Callum's chest flares within him and he ducks his gaze, watching as rainwater drips off his fingers and splashes onto the stable floor. "She's gone, isn't she?" he mutters around the lump in his throat. Ez studies him with his lips pressed together and his hands in his pockets, the way their father used to study them when they'd done something wrong. "She's gone," he says at last. Callum swallows a sob. He squints his eyes shut and rubs his hands over his face, wondering if the wetness on it is entirely rainwater after all. He lets out a ragged breath. "Gods, I'm such an idiot." Ez says nothing. He watches him expectantly, waiting for an explanation that Callum can barely string together in his own mind. Callum clears his throat. "This whole time, gods, and I just carried on like nothing was different, but it must have been killing her, and I didn't even notice." He takes a shuddering breath. "It's my fault, Ez. She left because of me. Because she's..." He stops. He still can't say it out loud. "Because she's in love with you," finishes Ezran. Callum stops. He stares at his brother, open-mouthed and wide-eyed. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," says Ezran. "How could I not? I see the way she looks at you." "You..." he starts breathlessly. "You knew and you didn't tell me." "I tried." Ezran shrugs, keeping his eyes on the straw on the stable floor. "In any case, it wasn't my secret to tell." "It wasn't," Callum skulls, frustrated and furious, although at whom, he's not sure. At Rayla for not talking to him. At Ezran for knowing and never saying anything. Mostly at himself, he thinks, for allowing it to come to this. "It was me, Ez," he cries hoarsely. "I did this whole time. I thought your stupid arranged marriage idea was what was screwing us up, but it was me. I was the one hurting her, and now she's..." He huffs, dropping onto the floor with his back against the far wall and his head in his hands. "She's gone and it's my fault." Ezran joins him. "I tried to tell you," he says again. "You wouldn't listen." "That was different," snaps Callum. "You told me we were in love with each other, and that wasn't. We weren't." "Weren't you?" Ez challenges. "Rayla loves you, Callum. She has for a while now, I think, but I don't think she actually admitted it to herself until a few days ago. She was here before, and I've never seen her so upset. And I think she was scared, and that she tried for the longest time to pretend it was nothing, but the more you traveled, and the closer you got, the harder it was for her to ignore." Callum has nothing to say to that. Hearing it in so many words makes his heart clench painfully within his ribs because there's no way to make this better. He did this. He hurt her. His constant need to be around her, to touch her and comfort her and hold her, must have been agony for her, and he'd never even considered the consequences of it. "How do I fix this, Ez?" Callum croaks at last. I just want her to be okay, and I did this to her and I don't know what to do." "Yes, you do," says Ezran. "You know you do." Does he? Callum really doesn't think he does. Every part of him wants to go after her, to apologize for not catching on, to hold her and let her cry against him until she feels better, but the only rational part of him that's left knows that he can't. When he says nothing, Ez sighs. Why is this so important to you? I don't, because she's my friend, Ez. Don't you want her to be okay too? I do, says Ez, but I'm not desperate to go to her now. He pauses, watching Callum from the corner of his eye. Then he takes a breath. She was distraught, Callum, he tells him quietly. Rayla doesn't run away from things, but the fact that she did, that's gotta tell you something about how much she's hurting right now. I hated seeing her like that, but there's something different between you and me, and you need to know what it is before you even think about trying to talk to her, or you'll make it worse. Callum's head snaps up. You know where she is, he breathes. Ezran nods. Of course, he says. But you can't see her until you figure this out. Ez, please. Callum's voice cracks under the strain, his heart pounding in his chest with a hope he's afraid to admit that he has. Where is she? I can't tell you, says Ezran. If you really think of her as just a friend, then you have to give her the space she needs to get past this. And if you can't do that, if you can't accept that, you need to understand why. He pats his brother's shoulder carefully and gets up. Don't stay out here too late. He leaves the stable without another word, and then Callum's alone, with nothing but the turmoil in his head and the horses for company. Outside, Ezran lets out a long sigh. He jogs under the inner bailey gate, cursing his brother for being so dense, but he reaches into his pocket and fumbles for the glass tablet within it with wet fingers. It glints at him in the pale light, his reflection in it tired and frustrated, before he slides a thumb across the runes on the edges, and writes into it with the tip of his finger. Is she there? The tablet wipes clean a moment later, lighting up in his hands as Claudia's fine loopy handwriting appears on the glass like rain on a foggy window. Yep, it reads. How's Callum doing? He's getting there, responds Ezran. Won't be long now. Notes. So I've been hinting that Ez and Claudia might be up to something for ages, but no one's caught me out, and now I'm marginally terrified that the little things he said that didn't quite add up in previous chapters wasn't enough foreshadowing for this straight-faced Smiley. Chapter 18. Summary. She's home. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 18. 6 weeks ago, Claudia had received a letter. It wasn't particularly long, just a slip of parchment bearing the king's seal and a formal summons. Eleni had delivered it. She'd been on her way home from her final shift on Ezran's crown guard before her leave for the baby, and he'd asked her to do so personally. I don't think it's anything to worry about, she'd said. You grew up with His Majesty, didn't you? Well, yes, Claudia and Soren had, but it had been a long while since they'd seen either Ezran or Callum, and after some of the things they'd done on behalf of their father, Claudia figured the distance was more than justified. It was still weird, though, at the time, she could think of no reason Ezran would choose to send her a summons over his brother and Rayla, but, curious, and because a formal summons didn't really give her a choice, Claudia had made the trip to the castle on her next free day. Some of the palace guards had been wary of her, they remembered her father, the things that he'd done and the chaos he'd caused, but Claudia wasn't there for them. They'd shown her to the audience chamber with an uneasy sort of respect, the same sort, Claudia thinks now, that Rayla must have to deal with every day she and Callum are in the Pentarchy, but when the doors had opened, Ezran had greeted her with a wide grin and open arms. Claudia. It's been a long time. I was going to ask Soren to come too, but... She'd laughed. He's doing better now. Not at his best yet, but definitely better. They'd caught up over a pot of tea and a plate of jelly tarts. Ez had complained about diplomats on both sides of the border, Claudia had gushed about Lesser, the usual sorts of things, and they were well into their second plate of jelly tarts before Ez had laid his plans out on the table for her. Look, he'd said. This thing between elves and humans, it's not going to go away unless they are given an example of a union that works, and, who better to show them than Callum and Rayla? It makes sense, right? Callum was going to have to marry politically anyway, but this gives him a chance to enter a marriage he might actually be happy in. They care about each other a lot. It's just, knowing them, they're not going to take it from me. They have to see it for themselves. Will you help? Would I? Claudia had laughed at him. The past aside, she'd always hoped there might be a way to salvage her and Soren's friendship with Callum and Ezran, and maybe even open that up to Rayla too. She'd heard the stories and the songs, seen the paintings, seen them fooling around the city like children when they visited. They were happy. Callum's feelings for her had long since faded, that was clear from every perspective, and Claudia had never really had a problem with it because those feelings had been replaced by a love for Rayla that was deeper and more meaningful in every possible way. They were, and are, perfect for each other, and she'd raised her teacup to Ezran and clinked it against his with an excited grin. "Sign me up." So she gave him a message. Mira and Ezran had messaged her when Callum and Rayla had arrived, when he'd told them he wanted to marry them, of Callum's denial and of Rayla's reaction to it. He'd instructed her to take Callum to the Wishbone when he needed to be shown the simplicity of the future he could have, and she'd made sure that every interaction they had with her, and Alis, and Eleni, and Soren forced them to think about what they meant to each other. All they ever intended was to make them think. Everything else was secondary to that. So when Ezran's scroll lights up her own message mirror today with a message that reads, "Rayla's on her way to the Wishbone," she's pretty upset. "Can you guys look out for her?" She drops everything and tosses Soren's cane at him. "Get your coat, Soren, we've gotta move." "What, but, dinner?" "Well, you can stay if you want, but I'm not explaining to Lessa that her favorite uncle was too lazy to make sure Prince Callum and Lady Rayla got there happily ever after." Soren makes a face. "Fine. X." Rayla's drenched when she tugs Vorobei to a stop outside the Wishbone. She shivers as she climbs off her, the rain cold and heavy against her skin. The lights in the shop come to life before she even raises a fist to knock, and when the door swings open, Eleni appears in the doorway and offers her a kind smile. Rayla swallows. I'm sorry for bothering you so late," she manages hoarsely. "Ezran," Ez said. "My lady," says Eleni with a hurried curtsy. "Please don't apologize. Come inside, you must be freezing." She tugs Rayla into the shop without waiting for confirmation, catching a towel with a deft hand as someone tosses it to her from the stairs. "Have you met Alis?" she asks absently, throwing the towel over Rayla's shoulders. Rayla shakes her head, and an elf, Alis, she presumes, steps into the light and offers her bow, something like an impish smirk on his lips. "My lady." It's a joke, obviously, elves have no such titles, but Rayla is so numb with cold and heartache that she barely has it in her to smile. She mutters a thanks under her breath as she allows Eleni to pat her dry, grateful to be out of the rain and for their warmth and hospitality. They usher her up the stairs, her first, then Eleni, then Alis, and she's greeted by Lessa's toothy smile, and Claudia and Soren. "Lady Rayla," says Lessa happily, but Soren holds her back and hoists her onto his hip with a huff. "Not yet, chicken, Rayla's all wet and gotta get changed first." He nods at her, and Rayla notes the way he's grown. He doesn't look at her the way he did all those years ago, eyes filled with disdain because she was just the enemy and nothing more. There's maturity there now, and an empathy that makes Rayla wonder how much he knows. She nods back, offers Lessa the closest thing to a smile she can muster, before Claudia presses a bundle of material into her hands. "Go get changed," she says. "You'll be warmer." Rayla hesitates. Fiddles with the hem of the shift in her arms. Considers asking what Ezran told them but decides, in the end, that she'd rather not know. Instead, Eleni lets her into Lessa's bedroom to change. "We don't have a spare room," she says, "but Lessa's offered hers to you, if you don't mind sharing. We can hang your things by the fire to dry, and there's some soup ready for you if you want it." "Thank you," murmurs Rayla. "You didn't have to do all this." "Probably not," says Eleni. "But a lady like yourself shouldn't be left out there with no place to stay." "I suppose." A pause settles between them. Eleni purses her lips, but even in the dark, Rayla can see the sympathy in her eyes and in her smile. When Rayla says nothing else, she curtsies once more, bidding her, "My lady," as she takes her leave, but Rayla starts forward. "Eleni." Eleni pauses for a moment longer, hand against the doorknob, the shine of her red-brown hair visible in the dim light. Rayla forgets what to say the moment she turns. Another thank you, perhaps. A promise to be out of their hair by the morning. She's not sure. Maybe she's just afraid to be left alone in the dark with her thoughts and her feelings with nothing to distract her from them. She's still not even sure what Ezran told them, let alone how, and in spite of the heaviness in her heart, she finds herself needing to ask. What do you know?" Eleni smiles. It's maternal and comforting, and it warms Rayla's bones, even in the chill of her still wet clothes. Enough to promise you that it's going to be okay, she says. And I mean that. You should get dressed, my lady. You'll catch a cold. X. The shift is rough against on her skin, but Rayla hardly notices it. In the end, the company, no matter how welcome it is too much for her, and she retreats into Lesser's bedroom and shrinks in on herself with her back against the wall. She must fall asleep, she thinks, because when she wakes again, Lesser is curled in her arms, and Claudia is seated at the edge of the bed. Do you really think Prince Callum will come, whispers Lesser. Claudia chuckles softly in the dark. He will, she whispers back. I know he will. Then Claudia's gone, and Rayla wonders if perhaps it was just a dream, contrived out of the last of her hope and longing for the prince who'd never loved her back. X. Callum doesn't sleep at all. He tosses and turns in his bed, stares at the ceiling, tries to lull himself to sleep with the sound of storm, but he sees Rayla when he closes his eyes, and his mind reminds him every moment he's awake that she'd left because of him. He's an idiot, he thinks for the 1000th time, and he promises himself that the next time she calls him a dummy, if there's a next time at all, he won't object. She could call him a range of synonyms and he wouldn't mind it. He just wishes she were here. His heart aches. His chest feels hollow. His eyes prickle and fill with water, and twice, he blinks it out of the way and allows tears to roll down his temples. In the end, he gets up. The rain stops just before dawn, and it finds him with a coat shrugged over his shoulders and hidden away in an embrasure on the north tower. It's still overcast, but the clouds tinge orange as the sun peers over the horizon. That reminds him of her too. She's everywhere to him, and at the same time, not there at all. He sees her in the halls and hears her laugh in the silence, feels the ghost of her touch against his skin and the silk of her hair between his fingers, remembers the warmth of her hands like he's holding them tight within his. The North Tower is full of her, the night they'd shared that bottle of Moonbury cider fresh in his memory, the days he'd taught her to sign fresher still. It's lighter when the trapdoor creaks open. Callum wipes at his face with the arm of his jacket, tries to hide whatever traces of sadness might still be there, but it's Aunt Amaya who climbs onto the landing, and she smiles at him as closes the trapdoor gently after her. She signs nothing as she leans against a melong, the way he does when Rayla's sitting in his place, he realizes. Her silence is inquisitive, but she doesn't ask. She only waits, and Callum breathes in the scent of rain before he plucks up the courage to address her at last. His throat feels sore, and it closes up anyway when he tries to speak, so he signs to her instead. I miss her. Amaya nods, but still, she signs nothing. Callum draws another breath. I miss her a lot, he tells her. All I can think about is her smile and her laugh and how much I just want her to be here and happy with me. But she's gone, and it's my fault. Amaya snorts gently, something like a smile tugging at her lips. You remind me of your mother, she signs to him. A little slow on the uptake, sometimes, but she always got there in the end. It was months before she realized King Harrow was trying to get her attention. I think you may have beaten her record. Well, thanks, signs Callum, his expression dry. That makes me feel a ton better. Amaya rolls her eyes good-naturedly, her snort becoming a tiny breath of a chuckle. Your mother's marriage was arranged too, remember? Although, I think she took it much better than you. It helped, I think, that she and Harrow were already a little in love. Ezran really told you everything, huh? Most of it, she signs, shrugging. I had to know, didn't I? She gives him a look, one that asks if he might tell her more, or if she should just go and ask Ezran for the rest of it. Callum sighs. We've been friends a long time, Aunt Amaya, he tells her. Well, maybe not that long, but we've been together through some really hard times that. I guess I don't really know how to be without her. We protect each other, and we take care of each other, and I know what everybody's been thinking, but I always thought love would involve fireworks, and butterflies in your stomach, and awkward blushing stuff, but I don't have that with her. What do you have with her? Amaya asks. What is she to you to begin with? Callum pauses. He thinks about her presence beside him, her smile on cold days, her voice when they're in Zadia and he misses Catullus, her eyes and her touch and her laugh. She's safe harbor when he's lost and comfort when he's found. She's a constant when he's confused and a guide when his decisions aren't the wisest. She's light when all he thinks there is darkness. She's his friend. She's his partner. She's home. Amaya gives him a look, and the realization fills his chest with warmth and hope and love, and he scrambles out of the embrasure. I'm an idiot, he declares. The lump in his throat is gone at last, and his heart beats too quickly in his chest for him to keep up, but it doesn't matter, he's an idiot, and he'll wear that like a badge of honor if it means he can go to her now and tell her himself. He makes for the trapdoor, shouting it over the castle once more. I'm an idiot. Amaya catches his arm. Where are you going? To tell her that I'm an idiot, he says stupidly. Oh, gods, Aunt Amaya, I'm the biggest idiot in this whole entire world and she needs to know, I have to. Do you know where she is? Oh. Callum almost deflates. It doesn't matter, I'll ask Ezran. She smiles at him. You won't need to do that, she signs, pulling a glass tablet from her pocket. Callum recognizes what it is immediately. Claudia had given one to Rayla a little while ago and told her to write into it if she needed to talk. He should be curious, he thinks, but he's too excited and too hopeful to wonder about it now. He takes it from Amaya, frowning a little and unsure how to activate it, but he slides a thumb across the runes on the edges as he examines it and it lights up in his hands. His breath leaves him as Claudia's handwriting appears on the glass. She's at the Wishbone. See you soon. Notes. LOL, yeah, I have to be up in 6 hours, but fuck sleep, am I right? Chapter 19. Summary. He tastes like the rain. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 19. The palace guards must think he's finally lost it. He catches the looks on their faces as he sprints past, the confused frowns and the looks of incredulity as he leaves his Aunt Amaya in his dust, excited grin on his face, frantic joy in his heart. Ultimately, Callum doesn't care. He hasn't lost it at all, he's found it, and the only other thought that races through his mind, apart from I'm an idiot, is how. How had he missed it? How had he spent so long in Rayla's presence, enjoying her smile and relishing her touch, without realizing how much he loves her? He wants to laugh. He wants to go back in time and slap his past self for it. More than anything, he wants to hold her to him now and apologize over and over again for being such a moron. He'd hurt her so much because he'd been too dumb to notice otherwise, and gods, she deserves so much better, but he loves her, and he's an idiot, and he needs her to know. He clutches the little glass tablet tighter, its edges digging into the flesh of his fingers as he trips over folds in the carpets and cracks in the stones. Aunt Amaya had told him it was Ezran's, and, somewhere in Callum's mind, he feels like they might need to have a talk about why he had one in the first place, but there's hardly room in his mind for that right now. Right now, there's only Rayla. The thought of her fills his mind and lifts his heart, and his lungs are burning when he stumbles into the stables at last, but he doesn't care. There's only her, the violet of her eyes, the silver of her hair, the beauty of her smile, and gods, he really is the biggest idiot in this whole entire world. She'll tell him so, he imagines, he hopes, because there's every chance she won't want to see him after the hell he put her through, but she needs to know. He saddles the mare he'd ridden a few days ago with clumsy hands, muttering an apology to her as he sets the saddle down too heavily on her back and tightens the strap too quickly around her belly. She brays, irritated, but she relaxes as he offers her an entire carrot from the bucket at the door. I'm literally the worst, he says, patting her snout gently. And I know I'm not Ezran, and you probably have no idea what I'm saying, but we need to get to the Wishbone as fast as possible. Think you can help me out? The mare huffs. Callum takes that as a yes. He climbs into the saddle with a grin, more confident on a horse than he's ever been in his life, and shakes her reins. She gallops forward, and Callum whoops, his heart beating in time with his scarf as it flutters behind them in the cool morning air. The cold is biting when Rayla wakes the next morning. It's barely past dawn. The rain must have stopped sometime last night because there are patches of orange sky visible through the lead-lined glass of Lesser's window. It would make for a lovely morning, she thinks, if her chest didn't feel so hollow. Lesser's still asleep, her head pillowed over Rayla's arm, the red-brown of her hair blending into the material of the shift Claudia had lent her last night. Grimacing, and afraid to disturb her, Rayla eases her arm back, breath hitching in her throat as Lesser stirs in her sleep but doesn't wake. When she manages to climb out of the bed at last, the door opens, and Claudia offers her a tired smile and cup of something brown and sweet and bitter. "How are you doing?" she asks quietly. Rayla shrugs. "Could be better, I guess." Claudia stifles a snort and holds the cup out to her. "Dark magic free, I promise. It'll warm you right up." There's not much else to do, and figuring she should probably get her things together and get out of Ayla's and Eleni's hair, Rayla shrugs a second time, accepting the cup with cold fingers as Claudia ushers her back into the living room. The only other person awake is Ayla's. Soren is sprawled on the chaise in the corner, cane leaning against the raised backrest. Eleni, she figures, is still asleep. "My lady," says Aylas, hiding a smirk behind his own cup. "Did you sleep well?" Rayla scowls at him, but whatever sass she might have for him dies on her tongue when she remembers that he and Eleni had taken her in with no questions asked. She looks between him and Claudia, noting the bags under their eyes and the exhaustion on both their faces. "Did either of you?" Aylas shrugs noncommittally and sips at his own cup. "We've had worse nights. I imagine we'll have to get used to all-nighters again soon anyway." Rayla purses her lips. She watches Claudia disappear downstairs to open up shop for the day out of the corner of her eye, but her mind drifts to Eleni and the unborn child within her belly, and to Lesser, and the little horns peeping out of her hair. "How do you deal with it?" she asks. "The staring, I mean. It can't be easy, being so far from home." "Speak for yourself," says Aylas absently. "My family's here. This is home." But Rayla cuts herself off. She stares into the murky depths of her cup, wondering how she might phrase her next sentence. "There are people who aren't happy about this. Elves, I mean. Settling in the human kingdoms. And there are people who are." He smiles at her over the top of his cup. "The others will learn. But, I mean, Lesser, and your baby. It won't be easy for them. It'll get easier." Aylas sets his cup down and leans back in his chair. His smile is odd, grim, but understanding, accepting of the circumstances, but hopeful that they'll change. He has no pretense around the situation, she realizes, but he doesn't much care for it, either. "It's stupid," he says mildly. "This hostility between elves and humans. Eleni and I weren't going to wait for them to be ready. Change doesn't come about by waiting, after all. You know that better than anyone." She does. It's hard, and their people still shout themselves hoarse over each other for no reason, but the difference is real to her now. Aylas and his family are proof of it, and it'd be a terrible shame to quit now. She's just not sure that she can keep going the way she and Callum had been. Things have changed too much, she thinks, and Callum will be happier if he's not dogged by feelings he doesn't return. Perhaps she'll go home. CZYM, and join his Dragon Guard for a while to let her feelings settle. It'll be easier there, probably, and she can go back to being an ambassador once she's learned how to be a person around Callum. She can live with that. She'll learn how to if it means he'll be better off in the long run. Aylas chuckles at her. "You two really are something," he says, picking up his cup again. Rayla feels her shoulders tense. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I've heard the songs," he says. "There isn't a bard who sings about you who doesn't sing about him too. You don't really think this will be it, do you?" Rayla looks away. "There's no coming back from something like this, Aylas," she mumbles. "What, you'll just go home, and that's it?" "What else am I supposed to do?" she snaps. It comes out louder than she means, and she winces, eyeing Soren, still sleeping on the chaise. "There's nothing else to do." "He doesn't." She takes a breath, steeling herself for the cold, hard fact that it is. "He doesn't love me, and he'll be happier if he doesn't have to deal with it." "He doesn't love you, you say?" Aylas snorts. He nods at something behind her. "What's he doing here, then?" Rayla turns, her eyes wide, her heart in her throat, and he's there, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his hair a wind-swept mess, his lips parted like he's not sure he's really seeing her, but he's there, and Rayla scrambles out of her seat, knocking her cup and spilling its contents over the rim, and over the sleeve of Claudia's shift. Vaguely, she hears Aylas get up, squeezing past them and heading downstairs to help with the shop, but it's just background noise to her because Callum is there, looking at her like he hasn't seen her in months. Callum, He crosses the room in 4 steps, and she's in his arms before she has the chance to stop him, her heart pounding so loudly and so painfully in her chest that he must feel it against his. She tries to pull away, but his embrace is firm and unyielding and she's missed his closeness and longed for it so much that she doesn't have the heart to really fight it. Callum, I can't. Oh, Rayla, I'm so sorry, he whispers against her, his nose pressed into the crook of her neck and shoulder as he tries to breathe her in. I'm sorry, gods, I'm such an idiot, and I'm sorry. Hear me out, he manages, his voice hoarse. He pulls away from her briefly, just far enough to look at her and to cup her face, and again, Rayla tries to fight it, but she can't. Her heart aches for him and because of him, and his eyes are so green and so beautiful that she can't look away, even now, as she tries to pry herself out of his grasp. Callum, she croaks, forcing a sob away as it tries to claw its way out of her throat. Please, I can't do this anymore. He shakes his head furiously and presses his forehead against hers. Rayla, please, just hear me out, okay? He takes a breath, shallow and shuddering and like he might be holding back a sob too. Gods, I don't know how I'm ever going to make it up to you after what I did, but you have to know. I'm an idiot. All this time, and I had no idea. You don't have to explain yourself, Listen, he insists, he begs. He presses his lips to her forehead like he thinks it might still her, and it does. Rayla forgets how to breathe, whatever arguments she might have against this caught in her throat as he tilts her face towards him, his eyes shining with joy, and guilt, and heartache, and love all at once. You've always been there, he murmurs, thumbs brushing the skin of her cheeks. Always. And I just assumed you always would be, and for a while it was because I thought I'd just, made you this default. I didn't realize, didn't even consider what it was doing to you, and I'm sorry for it, but, even more, he takes a breath, and he laughs like it's ridiculous to him that it got this far to begin with. I always thought there'd be fireworks, he whispers. Or butterflies in my stomach, or some big moment where I'd look at you and know for certain, but there's only you, there's always only been you, and you are so beautiful, and so kind, and so perfect, how could I ever make you think I don't love you? It comes out in a rush, and at first, Rayla thinks she might have misheard, but he kisses her forehead again, and then her temples, and then her cheeks. He hesitates at her mouth, their noses pressed together, his lips so close that she can feel the way his breath trembles against hers. He's waiting for permission, she thinks, for confirmation that this is okay, that he can close this gap between them once and for all. She does it for him. He tastes like the rain, his lips cold and sweet and everything she's wanted for so long that her heart almost explodes in her chest. She doesn't know when the tears started, but they are there now, leaving trails along her cheeks and past his thumbs as he caresses the marks under her eyes, and when she pulls away, her breath comes in with a sob. She leans into his touch, and when she finally finds words, they are barely a whisper. You're an idiot, she mumbles. I know, he laughs, like he's proud of it. He kisses her forehead once more. Rayla, I'm so sorry for what I put you through, but please, never, ever doubt it again. That you're an idiot. That I love you, he promises, his grin so wide and so happy that he doesn't even try to stop his own tears as they leak from his eyes. He's so caught up in her that he doesn't even argue beyond that. I love you, he says again, like he's savoring the words on his tongue. Please. Don't ever forget it. Despite her tears and the stress of it all, despite the hell that this past week and a half has been, she laughs too, and she pulls his face to hers once more. Don't let me, she whispers. He answers her with a kiss. They spend the rest of the day at the Wishbone. Claudia and Eleni are thrilled for them. Aylas and Soren make fun of them. Lesser's convinced they are characters from a fairy tale. At a more acceptable time of day, when the sun is higher in the sky and they've all had a little more than tea and that hot brown morning potion Claudia brews sitting in their stomach, Aylas opens a bottle of moonberry cider. They make dumb toasts to each other, and real toasts to Callum and Rayla and their unabashed affection, and, later, Lesser climbs into Rayla's lap and asks Callum a question. "Are you gonna marry Lady Rayla, Your Highness?" A pause settles in the apartment, but Callum catches Rayla's eye over the top of Lesser's tiny horns, and he smiles. Maybe he tells her. If she wants me to. It's still something they have to discuss, but he means it, and Rayla plants a kiss against the back of his hand as a promise that they will. They get back to the castle just after nightfall, all smiles and giggles, with her hand firmly in his as they climb the steps in the west wing to their rooms on the 4th floor. When Rayla opens her door, Callum pauses, reluctant to let their hands come apart. "Are you okay?" Rayla asks him. "Yeah," he whispers. "I just don't ever want to let you go, I guess." She opens the door wider for him, shy smile gracing her lips. "You don't have to." So he doesn't. Notes. "Alrighty team, here's where I'm gonna need your help. Let's not beat around the bush here, okay? They've been very stressed and there's a lot of pent-up emotion here, so yeah, NSFW things are happening behind Rayla's door. The question is this. How much of it do you want me to write? A. Mild, just enough so you know what happened, but in the vaguest possible way. B. Moderate, nothing too explicit but don't really mind either way. C. Marked, the whole thing. Remember kids. They're 18 in this fic, and I will put appropriate warnings at the beginning of the next chapter to give you all the heads up if we need it. Tell me what you want in the comments, and I'll do it. Chapter 20. Summary. My dad wrote me a letter before he died, he tells her. He said to reject the idea that history was narrative of strength and instead consider the idea that it can be a narrative of love. That's what I'm doing. Notes. Important stuff, please read, as per majority vote, I wrote the whole damn thing. The center-aligned XXs mark the start and end of anything explicit, but also please be aware that there's still a little non-explicit nudity following, but it's all very tame. Quick reminder to everyone that Callum and Rayla are both 18 in this fic, but other than that, enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. XX. Her lips are soft. Callum wonders, quietly, how he ever went so long without knowing the feeling of them pressed against his own. He smiles against her, his hands on her waist as he shuts the door behind them, enjoying her closeness and the way she fits against him. Her clothes feel rough against the pads of his fingers, every crease and crinkle an obvious obstruction to the rest of her. The thought makes him pause. He eases back, just enough to let out a slow, shaky breath, and he realizes, probably a little too late, how foreign this is for the both of them. He's never kissed anyone before. He was on the edge of 15 when he met her, when he still had that crush on Claudia, and after that, it's just been her. There's never been anyone else, and, as easy as this is, as natural to him as it feels, it's still so new that he can't help but feel just a little nervous. He hears Rayla swallow, her cheeks flushed as she brushes the hair out of his eyes. "Are you okay?" Callum nods, kissing her nose lightly to assure her. I've just never done this before," he murmurs, although he's not entirely sure what he means by this. He's not even really sure what he expects to happen, now that all their secrets are laid bare, and now that they are alone for the first time since. He certainly doesn't want to expect anything she's not ready for, heck, he's not fully certain what he's ready for, but he knows he wants to find out with her. "That's okay," admits Rayla quietly. "I haven't either. Do you want to stop?" She shakes her head. There's nervousness on her face too, but there's something darker, something wanting, in her eyes. "Not really." He breathes out. "Neither do I." XX. His hands are gentle as he eases off her vest and slides it down her arms, as he undoes her shirt and trails his fingers along her collar, as he leans in to press a kiss against her jaw, and her neck, and her ears. His lips make her skin tingle, and when he relieves her of her shirt entirely, there are goose pimples along her arms and across the swell of her breasts. Her own fingers tremble as she does the same for him. She pushes his jacket from his shoulders, and unclasps his belt, and pulls his sketchbook and his shirt over his head, and all of it goes in a pile on the floor, unnoticed and uncared for as they take each other in. She'd be lying if she said she wasn't nervous, but it's Callum, and even if her breath does shake as she undresses him and he her, there's care in his movements. He loves her, she remembers, and the thought makes her smile as he sits her down on the edge of the bed and kneels before her to tug off her boots. Her pants go next, and then her underthings, and then she's naked before him, the paleness of her skin stained pink under his stare. Her first instinct is to cover herself, to hide under the blankets, or to place an arm across her breasts, but she'd learned how to trust him implicitly years ago. She trusts him implicitly now. "You are so beautiful," he murmurs, kissing her lips once more. "You're not so bad yourself," she whispers. He's bare from the waist up, his muscles firm under the light tan of his skin. There's halo on his abdomen, and it disappears behind the waistband of the pants she's yet to take from him, the tumescence at his crotch difficult to ignore. It makes her swallow, even as he trails his lips over her breasts, leaving more goose pimples in his wake. Her hands card through his hair as he kisses her lower, across the taut skin of her belly, and then lower still, until he's parting her legs and kneeling between them and lowering his mouth onto her core. There's wetness there already, and Rayla's immediate response is to try and bring her knees together, like she's afraid of the sensation, or of how she might taste to him, but he kisses the skin of her inner thighs and waits for her to relax before he continues. She does. He loves her, she reminds herself, and the thought alone makes the tension leave her muscles. "Lean back a little," he whispers, his breath against her making her own shudder as she draws one in. She does as she's told, leaning back on her forearms to give him better access, and when his lips touch her, she gasps as warmth fills her chest and floods her senses. Somewhere in her mind, she wonders how he could know, but Callum's always been curious about anything and everything, and it only makes sense for him to be curious about this too. She lies back entirely, throwing one of her hands over her mouth to stifle the sound as he explores her with his, and then his fingers, her own wetness granting him entry with little resistance. He hesitates every time she whimpers, his concern for her obvious, but he doesn't stop, and Rayla arches her back and groans into her hand as pleasure coils in her abdomen. He has a finger buried within her to the knuckle when she comes undone, her muscles clenching and unclenching around him, his movements working her ragged until she's a breathless, boneless heap. When he pulls away from her, she misses his warmth immediately, and the single coherent part of her brain left makes her sit up a little and watch as he tugs his pants off his hips. "Was that okay?" he asks, climbing into the bed with her. She nods, still breathless, still flushed, still unable to put words together in a sentence that would make sense. He grins at her, pleased, and when he kisses her this time, she tastes herself on his lips. He pulls her to him, her chest flush against his, her skin tingling under his fingers as he caresses the side of her breast and the curve of her waist, but his eyes never leave hers. There's so much love in them, but there's uncertainty in them too, like he wants to continue but he's not sure what to do next, and like he's reluctant to push her too far too quickly. Rayla almost laughs. He's so caring and so sweet, and all he wants is to make sure that she knows he loves her, and oh, how she knows. Later, much later, once they've made a decision about Ezran's proposal, and once this becomes normal for them, she'll probably make fun of him for not noticing for so long, but right now, his confidence is failing him, and she needs him to know that she loves him too. She climbs on top of him, knees on either side of his waist, hovering over his length momentarily as she waits for his permission. He nods, words caught in his throat, and Rayla sighs, something like a moan escaping from the back of her throat as she takes him in. She pauses, allowing herself to adjust, her heart quick, her breath heavy, the reality of what they are doing settling like lead in her stomach. But he loves her, she reminds herself once more. The thought settles her, the memory of his words to her in the wishbone still fresh in her mind. She's home, and she's safe, and gods, how she loves him too. She loves his hands and how well they fit around hers, loves his voice and the way it reverberates in her ribs, loves his eyes and the way they look at her like she's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. She could never doubt him now, she thinks. Not when he looks at her with eyes like that, the green of them soft and filled with their future. "I never told you back, did I?" she breathes. "That I love you." "You shouldn't have to," says Callum, his voice shaking as she begins to move. "Tell me, I mean. I should have known. I should have, paid better attention. You won't miss it now, will you?" "Never," he laughs, his hands going to her hips to guide her movements. "And I love you." The words send a tingle up her spine, and she smiles as she leans over to kiss him. I could get used to hearing that. Yeah, chuckles Callum. He stops her, curls an arm around her waist, and rolls them over, careful not to hurt her, careful not to interrupt her rhythm. He takes over then, his fingers intertwining with hers as he moves within her. I love you, he whispers. Rayla groans, angling her hips for him as pleasure coils in her abdomen. Oh, Callum. I love you, he murmurs again. He kisses her ears and nips gently at the tender skin under her jaw. I love you. She hisses, clutching his hands tight as that same pressure from before builds within her again. Callum, she manages. Moon above, Callum. He bares his teeth, his words failing him as he rocks against her, his fingers digging into the backs of her hands like he's fighting the waning of his concentration. He's trying to be gentle, she thinks, but even she can tell he's too inexperienced to please her the way he wants to. Still, his movements make her moan, and she eases her hands from his grip as his breath begins to come short. Callum, she whispers, tracing his jaw, knowing he won't quite make it to her release. It's okay. It's okay. He groans, and his hips jerk as he comes, his movements erratic and uneven until he stops altogether and eases back. I'm sorry, he mutters. I should have. Callum. She smiles, pressing a kiss to his brow. It's okay. He huffs, his seed spilling from between her legs when he draws away from her entirely. Frustrated, he pulls her back to him, her back against his chest, his fingers flying back to the bundle of nerves at her core. She cries out, still sensitive from having him within her, but he holds her close and touches her until her hips arch away from him. She comes with a gasp, moaning his name against her palm until the world falls away and all she knows is Callum's lips on her shoulder and her heart fluttering within her ribs. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he whispers, kissing the space between her horns. I love you. She sighs, content and happy and so in love. I know. XX. She falls asleep against his shoulder later, silver hair splayed across his chest, his left hand resting idly against her waist, but despite the weariness in his bones and the way it gnaws at him, Callum doesn't sleep. There's a lot going on in his mind right now, and Rayla's gentle breathing is soothing to him and it eases his mind as his thoughts run rampant through his head. He still feels guilty, he thinks. How long has he loved her? How long had he forced her to bear his affection and made her think it was entirely platonic? How long had he considered her home before her aversion to him forced him to notice? He's been a tried and true idiot these past years, and he'll probably never make it up to her, not the way he wants to, but she's here now, in his arms where she belongs and he hopes it's a start. She's pretty in the moonlight. It's probably just him but he hopes, secretly, that everyone sees her the way he does, breathtaking and lovely and so beautiful that he wonders again how he possibly could have missed it. He smiles into her hair and presses a kiss on the crown of her head, hoping he'll have this image of her forever before he remembers that he can if he draws it now. He reaches for his sketchbook. She'd left it on the floor with the rest of his things, and it's a struggle to get hold of it without waking her, but he manages okay. At most, she stirs against him, but she doesn't wake, even as he shifts to balance the journal against his knee. He's drawn her a lot over the years, and the fact that he'd been in love with her the whole time becomes even more obvious as he flips through them. She's smiling, usually, there's a sketch of her there, blades at the ready before a spa, another of her laughing with those kids they'd met in Neolandia, a third from years ago, of her sitting by the fire with ZYM. She's been the primary subject of his sketches for ages, and he thinks he'd told himself that she was just an interesting subject, her horns and her ears and her fingers still fascinating to him, even now, but even he can't deny how obvious it must have been to anyone that wasn't them. He wonders if that's what this whole arranged marriage thing was about. He has no doubts that Ez wanted them to be an example for their people, but had his brother known what he'd been doing to Rayla? Is that why he had one of those mirrors from Claudia? Had she been in on this too? Some part of him supposes that he should be mad that they'd interfered, but then, how much longer would he have gone on ignoring his feelings? How much longer would he have hurt her for it? She'd left yesterday, because she couldn't do it anymore. She might have left anyway and he'd never understand why. At least Ez and Claudia's interference gave him the chance to rectify it before. He swallows, glancing at Rayla once more and deciding he doesn't want to think about it. He must nudge her or something while he's sketching her horns, because she stirs a little, her eyes fluttering open as she shifts against his shoulder. "Is it my turn for watch?" she asks tiredly. Callum blinks at her. She hasn't asked him that question in years, but then, she hasn't needed to. They haven't slept in such close quarters since the end of the war, but even then, it was nothing like this. He stifles a laugh in her hair. "Not tonight, Rayla. Go back to sleep. I'll look after you." She sighs, tugging the sheets over her shoulders. "Will you really?" Callum smiles. "Always. X." He draws her a bath in the morning. She sleeps through the noise, she must need it, Callum thinks, and he can't even really blame her. It's been a hard couple of weeks, and a fair bit of it is his fault, and he just wants to let her have one day to herself before they both have to face the rest of the world and whatever judgments they might have. He dresses quickly, intent on fetching her some tea while the tub fills, and when he gets back, she's sitting up in bed, blinking blearily at her surroundings, sheets pulled protectively over her chest. "Hey," he says, setting the tea on the desk by the window. "You okay?" She stares at him, and at the tray of tea on the desk, and at the bathtub filling with water through the open door on the far wall. Her eyes widen, just a little, realization dawning in her features the same way the early morning sun had not an hour ago. "Last night," she croaks. "That was real." "It was," says Callum, lips tilting upwards a little in her confusion. Yep." She pauses, her breath stuck in her throat like she's afraid this might still be a dream. "You love me," she breathes. Callum makes a face. "You forgot already," he pouts. "We can't have that." He takes her hands in his and tugs her upwards, the sheet falling reluctantly away from her body and back onto the bed. She flushes, there's no heat of the moment to help her forget her state of undress this morning, but the more lucid she becomes, the more relaxed she grows. The morning is cold, the first signs of winter making itself present on Rayla's skin in the form of the goose pimples on her shoulders. Callum stops her at the bathroom door to test the water before she climbs in, and, frowning, he draws a rune over the bath and mutters, "Aquam Calefatio" under his breath. Steam fills room, the water warming quickly under his fingers, before he beckons her forwards and helps her into the copper tub. "I brought you some tea," he tells her, sitting against the edge of the tub. "It's special stuff. Just to cover us for last night. Should work for you too, humans and elves can't be that different. I didn't know if you wanted it, but I did," says Rayla, drawing her knees up in front of her chest. She smiles at him, still a little self-conscious, still a little unsure of where they might stand after all of this. "Thank you," she says awkwardly. "You didn't have to do any of this." "I think it's the least I can do," says Callum honestly. "I really messed up." She shakes her head at him. "It's not like you did any of it on purpose." "Still." He rolls up his pant legs and swivels around, dipping his feet into the water to face her. "I looked through my sketchbook last night, you know. You're in it so much that I genuinely don't understand how I didn't figure it out earlier, and I'm so sorry for everything I put you through these past couple of weeks, years, even." "You don't have to keep apologizing, Callum." She rolls her eyes at him, her chin resting upon her knees, her lips tilting upwards into an exasperated smile. "How else am I going to make it up to you?" Rayla shrugs, hiding her smile in her knees as a blush crosses her face. "You could get me my tea," she says. "And, you could join me." Despite the events of last night, despite the fact that they've already seen each other and touched each other and held each other in the closest possible way, Callum finds himself blushing too. This is still new to them, they are still learning how to be so intimate, but the important thing is that they are learning together. He chuckles, steps out into her room for a moment to fetch her tea, and shrugs off his clothes to do as he's told. She shuffles forwards to let him climb in behind her, the bottom of her mug resting carefully on the edge of the tub, and when he's settled, she leans back against him, the back of her head resting against his shoulder, his arms circling around her waist like they belong there. He likes this. They've had a sort of casual intimacy for years, but this is so much more and he likes it a lot. He wonders if she does too, and the thought of it brings up the many things he knows they have to discuss. She's thinking about it too. He can see it in the way she frowns at her tea. "What are we going to do?" she asks at last. He doesn't need to ask about what. Callum sighs, his hand drifting absently to her shoulder to trace the lines of water along her skin. I want you to be happy, he murmurs after a moment. Nothing has to change. We don't have to get married. We don't even have to tell anyone, if you don't want to. I'd like it if we at least told Ez though. Rayla shakes her head. You can't seriously think we'll be able to keep this a secret? What do you mean? She sighs and takes a purposeful gulp of her tea. There are guards posted down the hall, Callum. They saw me invite you in last night. They didn't see you leave. This morning, you went down to the kitchens out of my room to find Moon tea. It'll be a miracle if people like Balin don't already know. Callum frowns, fingers pausing as he brushes her hair off the back of her neck. That's a little annoying, yeah. A little. He snorts to himself. Look, he says. I don't really care what anyone says about us, what matters most to me is that you're happy. I don't want you to feel like you're being forced into a marriage with me because you're worried about a scandal. I don't want you to feel like you're being forced into a marriage at all. If we get married, I want it to be because you want us to be, and because you want to spend the rest of your life with me. And, if you're not sure you want to make that commitment yet, or at all, that's okay. I'm with you. No matter what you say. Rayla giggles a little. That's sweet, she murmurs. The truth is, there's never been anyone else. I never imagined any version of the future without you. You think we should do it? I don't know. She takes a breath. I think about Alis and his family, and how life could be so much easier for them if we did it, but then you'd have people like Balin coming at you from every angle telling you that a union like ours could be is wrong, and she swivels around a little, just enough to touch her forehead against his. He's been bad enough for me these last couple of weeks. If we did it, there'd be more than just him. Callum pauses. Then he frowns. Wait, what did he do exactly? Rayla shrugs. Standard Balin things, I guess. He came and spoke to me a couple of times to get under my skin. Tried to get me to leave. Actually succeeded when he called me out on my feelings for you. She slurps at her tea again, and Callum catches a grimace that she tries to hide in her mug. He stares at her, furrowing his brow further when he remembers Balin's exchange with Ezran in the stables. He did what, now? It doesn't matter, says Rayla. I mean, we're here now, so, really, any plan he might have to get rid of me has essentially failed. Maybe it has, thinks Callum, but he's still pissed. How dare Balin even talk to her? His audacity irks him, but Callum takes a breath and swallows his anger. There's a storm brewing outside her door, they both know it, but right here, right now, things are quiet, safe, and he wants her to enjoy it, especially after everything she's been through lately. He purses his lips and says nothing for a while, reaching over her shoulder for the sponge and the jug on the other side of the tub. She hums appreciatively when he touches it to her shoulder. They don't say much while he works. He scrubs her arms, and her neck, and her hands, and, even more, she lets him, and the intimacy of his actions not lost on either of them. She lets him wash her hair and her horns too, his fingers gentle as he massages her scalp and teases the knots out of the fine silver. When he's done, she does the same for him. He thinks about the issue the whole time. It's a lot easier to understand Ezran's argument now that they are here and he's not ignoring his feelings, and when it comes down to it, he knows what he wants. He wants to be with her. There was never any other option there, and people like Balin can grow up or be left behind, because the world is changing for the better and he and she are leading the way. I love you, you know, he says finally, swiveling around to face her. So you've said, says Rayla, smirking. Many times since last night. I think we should do it. The smirk falls from her face, replaced by a look of not quite understanding, her eyes wide, her lips pressed into a thin line. He thinks perhaps she was expecting something else, a quip, or a joke of some sort, but certainly not this. What? Only if you agree, obviously, says Callum. I know it's early, but I know how I feel, and what I want. I mean, it took me a while, but I got there. Callum, she gapes for a minute. You make it sound like it'll be easy. There are people like Balin on both sides of the border. There are people in your own kingdom that'll mock you and hate you for it. And you want to put yourself through that. It's not no, he notices. It's not a refusal on her part at all, but concern for him. It's probably one of the reasons he'd fallen in love with her to begin with, even if he didn't know it at the time. He takes both of her hands in his and presses a long kiss into the back of each. My dad wrote me a letter before he died, he tells her. He said to reject the idea that history was narrative of strength and instead consider the idea that it can be a narrative of love. That's what I'm doing. You're absolutely sure you want to do this? Only if you want to too. She's still sort of staring at him with that not quite understanding in her eyes, but when it clicks at last, she lets out a laugh and hides her face in her hands. Let's do it then. Her giggle is infectious, and it makes Callum smile too. Yeah. Yeah, she says. Let's get married. Notes. Prompts filled. From an anon on Tumblr, Callum touches Rayla's horns. Also from an anon, a confession, followed by Callum reassuring Rayla that everything will be fine despite their elf/human relationship. Chapter 21. Summary. An elven princess of Katolis. These will be interesting times indeed. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Xzi. It's a peaceful morning. They spend most of it hidden away in Rayla's room, enjoying each other's uninhibited affection, not quite ready for anyone else's company but their own. She steals his jacket while he draws her, he grins good-naturedly when she tries to draw him, they laugh, and they kiss, and they cuddle, and to Rayla, it feels like a dream. Callum promises her that it's not, because, in his words, not even dreams are this good. She'd snorted unbecomingly at that, his smile, dumb and delighted, doing little to settle the giddiness in her system. She's happy. He's happy. And this is good and perfect and everything she hadn't realized she'd wanted. Not so secretly, she wishes the morning would last forever, but the sun crosses the sky anyway, ignorant of their little sanctuary, and by noon, they know they can't hide any longer. The emptiness in their stomachs is difficult to brush aside anyway, and they figure Ezran probably needs to know that they've come to a decision. Callum closes his sketchbook. Rayla returns his jacket. Ready, he asks her, his hand on the doorknob. Not really, thinks Rayla, but she grips his other hand tightly, steeling herself for reality. She takes a breath. Yeah. His smile is as nervous as she is, but he takes a breath too and opens the door. The walk down to the dining hall is longer than she remembers. She knows why. Most days, the glares that follow her around the castle are distrustful and apprehensive, but at least those she can understand. Today, there's a sort of disgust there too, from the guards most loyal to Balin. It makes her want to shrink back, but Callum grips her hand tighter and refuses to let her, tugging her forward despite his still nervous grin to put an arm around her shoulders. It's a little protective, and a lot proud, but most of all, it's a definitive decision not to care. Let them run to Balin if they want. There's a look on Callum's face that even dares them to. He loves her, and he's not about to back down just because the castle guards aren't ready for it. It spurs Rayla's confidence, and her own arm comes to a rest around his waist, the fingers on her other hand fiddling with his as they rest over her shoulder. His smile and his affection are comforting, and it soothes the tension in her back until it's gone completely, and they are just two kids in love, heading down to lunch like anyone else. It's easier after that. Aunt Amaya, will you be staying for the ball? It's only a couple of days more. It's lunchtime, and Ez swings his feet in his chair. The last couple of weeks have felt long, in part because it's been so frustrating to watch his brother and Rayla dance around each other, in part because Balin's interference had made it even worse. He'd never meant for it to go as far as it had. The goal had always been just to make them think about what they might mean to each other, but he hasn't seen Rayla since she left the other night, and Aunt Amaya had given Callum his message mirror so he still doesn't know if they've made up. It's a mess. Maybe if Balin hadn't gotten involved, it would have been altogether less complicated, but guilt churns in his stomach anyway, and the thought of the ball brings him relief, if only because it means this fortnight will be over at last. Aunt Amaya shrugs, reaching for a jelly tart in the center of the table before she signs her response. I don't see why not, interprets Gren. Plus I'd like to see how certain events have panned out. You think Callum and Rayla have worked things out? With respect, Your Majesty, says Gren, as himself now, there's talk among the castle guards that they've done more than just that. Ezran tilts his head at him, but the dining hall doors swing open and he finds he doesn't need to ask. His face splits into a grin. He clasps his hands in front of his lips, hopeful and excited, and he climbs out of his chair to greet Callum and Rayla as they stride through the doors, his arm on her shoulder, hers around his waist. It can only mean one thing, but Ez asks anyway. Is everything okay now? They look at him, and then each other, and Callum plants a kiss on Rayla's cheek and grins. Better than okay, he says. Things are great. Yes. Ez lets out a cheer, and, laughing, he launches himself at the two of them and brings them into the tightest hug he can manage. I'm so happy for you both. You guys had me seriously worried for a second there, but he grins at Rayla. I told you everything would be okay. You did, says Rayla, glancing at his brother, her eyes soft. Weird that you knew how things might turn out, though, she drawls, turning back to Ez with a smirk pulling at her lips. Even weirder, everyone at the Wishbone also apparently knew. Care to explain, Your Majesty? Ezran flushes at that. He eases back guiltily, his eyes on his shoes. Guess the bantha's out of the bag for everyone, huh, he mutters. Rayla scoffs. How long had you known? Since the last time you guys were here, Ez mumbles. I'm really sorry. Claudia and I, everyone, really, we just want you to be happy, but we shouldn't have meddled. Callum smirks too, but he releases Rayla momentarily to fumble for something in his pocket. This is yours, he says, holding the message mirror out to him. Ezran hesitates as he takes it, but Callum's smile is genuine. You're not mad? No, says Callum, his fingers finding Rayla's like they've always belonged intertwined with hers. I mean, probably don't pull this kind of thing again, but, if you and Claudia hadn't gotten involved, I never would have figured out how I felt about Rayla. I owe you for that. He grins at him, and then at her, bringing her hand to his lips in a show of sickening, unashamed affection that would make Ezran groan if he wasn't so happy for them. Oh, by the way, about that marriage you wanted to arrange. Ez swells, almost afraid to hope that they might have sorted this so quickly too. You'll do it. Yes, says Rayla, her smile warm as she looks from him to Callum. We think we will. Gods, they're so in love that it's gross, but Ezran is ecstatic. His own smile is so wide that his face hurts, and there's a part of him that honestly thinks he might cry. You guys, he manages, voice hoarse with happiness as he throws his arms around them both a second time. Behind him, he hears Aunt Amaya and Commander Gren get out of their chairs, and Ezran pulls away from them, massaging his cheeks as he goes. For a moment, he's nervous, but he reminds himself that Aunt Amaya has been a better sport about this than anyone. She'd given Rayla a chance, like she promised she would, had given Callum that final push, despite her misgivings about their relationship, and she looks at the two of them now and smiles as she gives them her blessing. Our congratulations to you both, says Gren on her behalf. We're very happy for you. Rayla pauses, looking between them with a frown. We. Yes, signs Amaya. I still don't entirely approve, she admits, but Callum is happiest with you, and, frankly, a complete mess without. I've seen that for myself now. You have my blessing. Aunt Amaya. Callum laughs, untangling himself from Rayla to give his aunt a grateful hug. His grin is so wide and so pleased that Ezran can't help it. He joins in too, overjoyed that his family, his whole family, his aunt, and his brother, and his soon-to-be sister-in-law, can be in the same room and share in each other's joy. It's a better outcome than he could ever have imagined, and he laughs with them, happy for his brother and Rayla, hopeful for the future of their respective people, and vindicated in the fact that their marriage isn't such a bad idea after all. It's a good afternoon, thinks Callum. Lunch becomes more of a private celebration of their engagement filled with wine and cheese and pastries, and when they are done, he and Rayla decide it might be worth making one more visit to the Wishbone to thank Aelus and his family, and Soren and Claudia for putting up with them. Ez gives them invites for the ball to give to them, and when they get there, Soren's running the shop for the day. Aelus, he tells them, is upstairs balancing the books. Claudia and Lesser are both with Eleni on her final appointment with the midwife before the baby. You're doing it then? Soren asks them, looking pleased. Yeah, says Callum, grinning like the idiot that he is. I should have listened to you. To everyone. No offense, but yeah. Soren snorts at him. To Rayla, he adds, should I be telling everyone to start calling you Princess Rayla over Lady Rayla then? Rayla skulls, looking repulsed by the title. Call me that and I will personally make sure that not even magic lets you walk again. It's true though, he says, his voice teasing, an exaggerated simper on his lips. He jerks his head at Callum. If you're gonna marry him, you'll be a princess. Shut up. What's Lesser going to call you if she can't call you Princess Rayla? Guys, laughs Callum. He puts the invites on the counter and slides them towards Soren just as Aelys appears at the foot of the stairs. Ez is making a formal announcement at a ball he's hosting in a couple of days. He's trying to promote peaceful celebrations between elves and humans by having them a couple of times a year, I think, which is fitting. Callum wrinkles his nose, wondering how long, exactly, Ez has had this in mind. He shakes his head. In any case, we want all of you to come. A ball, you say, says Aelys, picking at an invitation to examine the details on its front. I'm sure we can make an appearance. Congratulations by the way. He grins at them both. I suppose you're not surprised at all, says Rayla pointedly. Not in the least. Aelys smirks. An elven princess of Catullus. These will be interesting times indeed. I will hurt you both. I'm being serious, Rayla, says Aelys. He glances between them, smiling almost wistfully at the arm Callum has around Rayla's waist. You know how hard it is to be here. You know there are people who won't take this lightly. Are you sure you're both ready for the storm coming your way? From both sides. We've done worse, asserts Rayla. Her confidence is comforting, and Callum smiles and presses one more kiss into her hair. They'll learn, right? Aelys' smile becomes a grin, proud of her conviction, of her, of them. Yes, they will, he says. You'll teach them. X. It's an almost perfect day, the morning with his beloved, the afternoon with his family, the early evening with their friends. Callum had known since he was a child that his marriage would be arranged eventually, but there was no way he could have predicted being so happy about it. Ez had been right, about him, and about Rayla, about everything, and as complicated and as political as it's going to be, he knows with an absolute certainty that it's all going to be okay. How could it not be? He's got Rayla. It's not until they get back to the castle that night that the earliest signs of the coming storm make themselves apparent. They're in the entrance hall. Admittedly, Callum could probably ease up on his displays of affection, but what can he say? They're newly engaged, and obviously in love, and they've had a mess of a time figuring it out. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to want to be touching her every opportunity he has, at least until Balin appears at the entrance of the west wing, looking sullen and disgusted at the way he's clutching her hand in his. My prince, says Balin, bowing. If I may. You may not, says Callum shortly, the bliss in his system turning quickly into irritation. He tugs Rayla closer. You're in our way, General. Balin skulls. This marriage is wrong, my prince. You know that it is. You cannot proceed with this union. Callum smirks, despite himself. Here's a question for you, Balin. Didn't His Majesty, the King, formally warn you about the consequences of coming near her ladyship again? Balin pales a little, but he stands his ground. Your Highness, You're near her. Please move. Your Highness, he snarls. You must understand, I think you're making a mistake. Callum shakes his head, and he releases Rayla just for a moment in order to jab a finger against Balin's breastplate. I really don't care what you think, he snaps. You undermined my brother at every opportunity, you summoned my aunt in an attempt to interfere with a marriage that's literally only just been arranged, and you repeatedly, I'm told, approached and offended an elven ambassador in a bid to force her to leave. I am your prince, and an archmage. You know what I'm capable of. Don't tempt me. But, Your Highness. This isn't a joke, Balin. Callum. A hand touches his elbow, and Callum's anger leaves him in a rush. Rayla tugs him back, her jaw set, but with something like pity in her eyes. Balin's not even worth it, he realizes. He's a sad old man who has no concept of what it means to love as truly and as deeply as they do, and Rayla's tired and just wants to go to bed. He slips his hand into hers again and squeezes, a smile returning to his lips as he does so. "Move, Balin," he says, without looking at him. "You're in our way. Your Highness. Move. I won't ask you again." Balin skulls, but he does with no further argument, and Callum tugs Rayla past without so much as another glance at him. She waits until they're in the safety of his room before she asks, "Are you really sure you want to put up with that for the rest of your life?" Callum shrugs, whatever feelings of contempt he might still have disappearing as he pulls her close. "I'd put up with that and more, if it means waking up every morning with you." He smiles at her and steals a kiss. "You'll be royalty soon anyway." What's he gonna do? Notes. 1.5 more, team. Chapter 22. Summary. I'm not backing out. Her voice is firm as she ducks forward to press a quick kiss onto his lips. I'm with you. No matter what. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. XG. Rayla has one dress that she keeps folded neatly in the bottom of Callum's pack for the rare occasion that she actually needs it, but she tries it on to show Claudia the morning of the ball and Claudia grimaces. Admittedly, it's an old dress. She'd picked it up from a little Zadian town a couple of years ago at Callum's insistence. "You're an ambassador now, what if we have to go to, like, formal things?" It's a little wrinkled, and she's worn it a handful of times since, but it's still mostly nice. Aesthetically, it's simple, just a cowl neck column dress in traditional moonshadow colors, nothing too fancy, but fancy enough pass for an ambassador's gown. Practically, she thinks it's annoying, but it's light enough to move in and the cowl comes low enough around the back that she can still have her weapons on her if she feels she really needs them. In hindsight, she probably should have thought about laying it out earlier than today. At least then, she might have been able to get the wrinkles out, but between the mess that was figuring things out with Callum, and the stress of dealing with Balin, this Unity Ball thing that Ez wants to hold was the last thing Rayla had on her mind, and even now, it's hard to care. Claudia's grimace, however, doesn't go unnoticed. "What's that face for?" Claudia purses her lips, scrunching her nose at creases in the skirt. "It's just. I feel like it's time for something new." "What's wrong with this one?" "Nothing," says Claudia earnestly, although the grimace doesn't really budge. I think it passes for an ambassador's gown, but the thing is you're not just an ambassador anymore. You'll be a princess soon." Rayla scowls at her. "We talked about this. A title's a title, Rayla. You won't not be a princess just because we don't say it." Claudia rolls her eyes at her good-naturedly, amused smile playing at her lips. "Look," she says, her smile falling just a little, "I know we haven't been friends for that long, but I feel like you should trust me on this. I don't doubt that you know how to deal with nobility, but once Ez makes that announcement, they'll be watching you like hawks. I mean that'd happen to anyone if they had to marry Callum, but again, you're not just anyone. You'll be the first elven princess of Katolis. People like Balin are going to be waiting for you to slip up, and this ball is where it starts." "Very encouraging, thank you." Rayla groans, hitching her skirt above her ankles with a grimace to kick the chair out from under that desk she doesn't use. She slumps into it, pouting like a child, bare feet propped up on the corner of the bed while Claudia smooths out her surcoat. It's true and she knows it. They're already under scrutiny and there are only 5 or 6 people who know about it. She can't even imagine the kind of scrutiny they'll be under once it's public knowledge. "What do you propose then?" Claudia purses her lips. "Well," she starts, "there is something you can try on, in the back of the wishbone." Rayla stares at her. "Are you kidding me? We've been plotting this for weeks. You didn't seriously think we wouldn't be prepared on the off chance that things might work out the way we intended, did you?" Claudia offers her a sheepish grin, shoulders lifting in a sort of shrug that makes Rayla wonder how many other details they'd gone to the trouble of preparing for. She holds up her hands. "I totally understand if you don't want to," she says quickly. "I didn't want to bring it up because, well, Ez and I have meddled enough. But, if you wanted to." Rayla sighs, picking at the wrinkled chiffon of her skirt. The first time she'd worn it, Callum had turned into a grinning, spluttering mess who'd probably been a little too proud to have her on his arm considering they were just friends at the time. The colors aren't so bright now, the material rougher against her fingers, the silver edging beginning to fray in a way that can't really be ignored. When it comes down to it, Claudia's right, this announcement will be the beginning of what will probably be a long year, fraught with scrutiny from both sides of the border. She might as well be as prepared for it as she can be. If you tell me you've got a wedding dress down there too, I swear to the moon and stars, Claudia, you and I are going to have a serious talk about privacy, but, fine. Show me the thing. Claudia laughs at her, hopping off the bed to let her change. There's no wedding dress, I promise. But I have a good feeling about this. I'll be outside when you're ready. X. The day passes in a hurry. Callum spends most of it getting a new suit tailored. He's grown a few inches since he last needed to dress up, and the sleeves of his old dress coat are short enough on him now that it's difficult to hide. He'd left it too late, far too late, and despite his compliance, Callum knows the royal tailor resents him a little for it. The sun is already low in the sky, the decorations are hung and the lamps are lit, the castle is spotless, and he's still here, getting the finishing touches done on his suit. He feels a little guilty for it, but it's been a heck of a fortnight, and he's honestly just glad it's coming to a close. The new coat is scarlet, like his old one, but where his old was embellished in maroon, this one decorated in gold. It's a beautiful for a day's work, and Callum makes a quiet note to thank the tailor with a bottle of wine or something once this is all over and done with. Sorry again for the late notice, he mutters, probably for the 8th time today when out of the corner of his eye, he catches Ezran slip into the room. Almost done. Almost, grumbles the tailor, and Callum chuckles awkwardly and mutters a 9th apology. Ezran snorts. He's dressed already, his crown polished, his own coat sharp. It makes Callum grin a little. His brother is only 13, but he has the grace and the propriety of a gentleman and a king that Callum absolutely did not have at the same age. He wishes their father were here to see him, or their mother here to dote. They'd be proud of him, Callum's sure of it, but the thought fades as Ez crosses the room. He holds out a box. Callum recognizes it immediately, his breath hitching in his throat. Is that Mom's ring? There's something sad in Ezran's smile, but he puts the box into Callum's pocket anyway, his eyes shining with hope and happiness and pride. I found it in Dad's stuff. I think she'd want Rayla to have it. She would have liked her. She would have, murmurs Callum, just as the tailor steps away. He tests the fit of his jacket, and his slacks, and, pleased, he thanks the tailor, profusely, and with a 10th apology, before he follows Ez out of the room. His hand goes straight to his pocket, his fingers running over the polished wood of his mother's old ring box, his thumb pausing at the bronze latch. I'm sorry I had to ask you guys to do it like this, says Ez quietly. I think, maybe, if I'd left you two alone for long enough, you would have gotten there on your own and you could have had something a little quieter. Callum snorts. If you'd left us alone, I might not have gotten there at all, he says, waving him off. He takes the box from his pocket and opens it with a grin. It hardly looks like a ring fit for a queen, it's just a gold band, curved to a point at the front, a delicate filigree engraved into the metal. Their mother had always preferred practicality over aesthetic, she and Rayla are alike in that way, and, if she were alive today, he thinks Ez would be right, she would have liked her. He shuts the box. Seriously, Ez? Thank you. For this, too. He brandishes the box at him before he pockets it once more. You can still back out, says Ez. You don't have to get married for politics. You can go and just get it done in secret or something if you want to avoid all of this. Callum shakes his head. Don't think we don't know what we're getting into here. We know. Well and truly. But whatever's coming, we can take it, as long as we're together. That's the whole point of this marriage thing, right? He chuckles at his brother and musses his hair gently, careful not to mess it up too much. They're in the entrance hall now. There are people milling around in the ballroom already, the murmur of their voices muffled only by the closed oak doors. Callum straightens his jacket. How do I look? Pretty dashing, if I do say so myself, he hears Rayla say, and Callum turns and feels his breath leave him entirely when he spots her on her way down the stairs. Claudia's with her, but he hardly sees her. Vaguely, he hears her mutter something to Ezran before she slips into the ballroom to join Soren and the rest of their friends, but Callum's attention is on Rayla and Rayla alone. Her hair is in a braid again, more elaborate than last time, with little gold flowers woven into the silver, but he doesn't recognize her dress. It's certainly not the one she keeps in his pack. This one is newer and prettier, an off-the-shoulder sheath, green as always, with gold lace in the bodice and an attached chiffon cape that follows her down the stairs like mist rolling off her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he breathes, his grin wide and dazed. "Thank you," murmurs Rayla, her cheeks pink as she smiles shyly at her feet. Callum takes the opportunity to press a kiss onto her forehead, which only makes her laugh and blush more. She glances at Ezran and pauses when she notices the grimace on his face. "What's wrong?" Ez huffs. "You may not need an announcement," he says with a scowl. Callum blinks at him. "What?" "Sounds like someone let something slip," grumbles Ez. "Nothing we can do about it now. Are you guys ready?" "I don't think we really have a choice anymore," mutters Rayla. She steadies herself and takes Callum's arm. "Let's do this. X." There'd been talk of a betrothal long before the ball had even opened. Claudia had heard it whispered between guards and scullery maids and the heads of the lesser families on her way to see Rayla this morning. They were just rumors, she'd told herself, and with the way Callum and Rayla had been behaving over the last day or two, she shouldn't really have been surprised. But the talk has only grown louder since, and it was fine when it just sounded like rumors, but there are details about it now that puts Claudia on edge. It buzzes in her ears the way flies might, and the elven dignitaries that are present today look a little perturbed by the news. "You humans can't ever keep anything to yourselves, can you?" says Aelus mildly. "And you elves can't ever not be on your high horses," sneers Claudia. Aelus raises an eyebrow at her, and she relents. "Sorry," she mumbles, taking a breath. "That was uncalled for. I'm just nervous for them." "They'll be nervous enough on their own, I think," says Eleni gently. "But they'll be okay. They've dealt with worse than rumors before." "This isn't a rumor, though," says Claudia, wringing her hands so much that Soren actually passes lesser to her in a bid to keep her still. "They know too much. It's like someone's told them." He snorts at her and jerks his head towards the front of the ballroom. "Three guesses who?" Claudia frowns, craning her neck to look over the crowd before she spots him, Balin, smirking into his wine as he listens to the chatter. She skulls. "That bastard. X." Rayla feels the stares land on them immediately, from the elven emissaries on the right side of the ballroom, and from the human ambassadors on the left. For what it's worth, having both sets of dignitaries in the same room without hearing them shouting over each other is a pleasant change, and while none of the looks they receive are openly hostile, there's still a lot of distrust between their people, and fact that they are staring at all puts her on edge. To their left, the present citizens of Catullus bow to Ezran and Callum as they pass. To their right, the various parties of elven dignitaries watch, their faces hard and apprehensive. Rayla swallows, her grip on Callum's arm tightening just slightly before Ez clears his throat and the buzz dies down entirely. "Welcome everyone," he greets cheerfully, in spite of the spark of animosity in the air. "Welcome especially to our friends from Zadia. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight. Please make yourselves at home, we have plenty to share with you, and I hope we all enjoy tonight's Unity Ball, the first of what I hope will be many celebrations of peace and prosperity between our two nations. While I do have an important announcement to make, it can wait until later tonight, so for now, please, eat, drink, be merry. I hope you enjoy tonight's ball." He's answered by polite applause, mostly from the human side of the ballroom. The elven emissaries still look a little uneasy, but Ezran waves his hand, and the band starts up again, the chatter filling the room until it's humming in Rayla's ears. "Hey!" She almost jumps, but it's just Callum, loosening her fingers from the grip she has on his arm. She does it for him, releasing the sleeve of his coat with a sharp gasp. She hadn't realized how tense she'd become. "Are you okay?" he asks. "Sorry," mumbles Rayla. She picks Aelus out of the crowd easily, the only elf happily intermingling on the human side of the ballroom, Eleni on his right with a hand on her belly, Soren on his left in his old armor with his hand on the pommel of his sword like a warning to the less open-minded. Claudia's with them now too, her eyes apprehensive as she bounces Lesser in her arms. There are delegates here from everywhere tonight, many of whom Rayla and Callum have met personally on their travels throughout Xadia and the Pentarchy, but it's the delegate of Moonshadow Elves in the corner that get to her. They watch her and Callum without even trying to look surreptitious, their faces hard and uneasy about the way she's standing so close to him. She's had those looks before, but it's worse coming from her own people. She tries to shrug it off. In all fairness, they've come a long way. 3 years ago, a gathering like this would have been unfathomable, but there's still distrust in the air, and more than that, there's a sort of suspicion that makes Rayla wonder exactly how much they know. Callum steps closer purposefully, his fingers finding hers. "I'm scared too," he murmurs. "How are you dealing with it?" "Easy," he says. "I'm with you." He offers her a grin. It's nervous, but it's catching, and he lifts her fingers to his lips in full view of everyone and places a kiss against her knuckles. "Do you wanna dance?" Rayla hesitates, but they are staring already, and they'll keep staring anyway, especially after Ezran makes the announcement. If Callum can deal with it by focusing on her, then she can do the same for him. "Sure," she says at last. "I'd love to dance." They're halfway through it when they're interrupted the first time. It's one of the Moonshadow Elves, Theoden. Callum thinks his name is, a delegate from Rayla's hometown, and he looks over his nose at them, his eyes unreadable. "Your Highness," he greets with a bow, his voice icy. "And Rayla. Or perhaps I should call you my lady." "I'd prefer if you didn't," says Rayla shortly. "What can we do for you, Theoden?" "I was only going to ask if I could cut in." Rayla snorts. "Let's not pretend that you don't know I'm spoken for." "So the rumors are true then?" Theoden pauses to study them both. "Do your uncles know?" Rayla has nothing to say to that. She looks away from him, and from Callum, her hands dropping to her sides. "That's enough now," says Callum sharply, stepping between them. "With all due respect, Theoden, I think you're bothering my intended." Theoden pauses a second time. He studies Callum uneasily, but not, Callum notes, unhappily, and in the end, he steps back. "I hope you know what you're doing," Theoden tells them. "Both of you. Other elves will not be so kind. My congratulations to the two of you." He bows once more and turns on his heel, but not before Rayla calls after him. "Theoden," she starts. "Who told you?" Theoden purses his lips. "There were rumors," he says. "But I did hear one of your generals discussing it." "That one there?" He jerks his head at someone behind them, and when Callum turns, he finds Balin talking quietly to King Florian of Delbar. "Enjoy your evening." When he's gone, Callum finds his arm going straight to Rayla's waist, because he knows what's on her mind, and the atmosphere in the ballroom is delicate enough. He pulls her back to him, even as she resists, even as her eyes harden and her jaw clenches, but he puts her hand back in his and starts swaying again before she can do anything else. "Rayla," he whispers. "Rayla, Ray, come on, it's okay. It's okay. He'll get what's coming to him. That son of a... Rayla. Look at me." His hands go to her cheeks, and he presses a quick kiss to her nose to calm her. She stills in his arms, and Callum sighs and shoots a glare at Balin over her shoulder. "You know what this is. You know he's doing. He's trying to provoke you into doing something reckless, or into backing out of this. You know it." "I do," she snaps. "But gods, Callum, he's done enough." "I know." He kisses her nose once more. "Take a breath. It's okay." Theoden is only the first of many, many warnings disguised thinly as congratulations from both her own people and Callum's, and when Rayla reminds herself that Ezran hasn't even made a formal announcement, she retreats to the back corner of the ballroom for some space, only to find Lesser and Eleni have beaten her to it. "Lady Rayla," greets Lesser happily. Tired as she is, Rayla crouches over to grin at her. "My lady," she says with a little bow. "Are you enjoying the party?" "It's kinda boring," admits Lesser, but she giggles anyway and grabs Rayla's fingers with her little hands. "I think Mama's tired." "She is tired," says Eleni with a chuckle. She's seated in one of the cushioned chaise lounges, one hand at that small of her back, the other rubbing carefully at her belly. "In hindsight, I shouldn't have come. It's getting a bit soon for the baby." Rayla grimaces on her behalf. Can I do anything for you? Not particularly, although if you'd like to distract Lesser for a while, I wouldn't say no. She chuckles a little and rolls her shoulders as Lesser tries to tug herself up and onto Rayla's lap. We found out who told everyone. So did we, mutters Rayla darkly. If it weren't such a crime to make a scene at a formal event, I might have murdered him already. I'm glad that you haven't. Eleni gives her a look. You know what's at stake, my lady. Believe me, I know what it's like to want to hurt him, but any harm to him from you won't help. It's an honest miracle His Majesty managed to get a gathering of this size to begin with. I wasn't serious. Rayla huffs. What did he do to you that made you want to hurt him? She scoffs. He tried to have me dismissed from His Majesty's Crown Guard when he found out about Aelus. And then again when I fell pregnant under the excuse that I wouldn't be able to protect His Majesty adequately in my condition. His Majesty wasn't convinced, obviously, and unfortunately for Balin, the Crown Guard doesn't fall under his command. Rayla makes a face at her, disgusted by the thought. He's a real piece of work, isn't he? He's been at court for too long, Eleni tells her. Court is a game, my lady, and there's no way to play it but dirty. His tricks don't work on King Ezran anymore, but you should be warned, he's planning something else. He's going to provoke you. He'll say things to start a scandal, to force you to act on that impulse because it's the easiest way to demonstrate that this arrangement won't work. Don't rise to it. Whatever he does. You know how fragile this piece is. Yeah, grumbles Rayla, because she does know, it's everything they've worked for, and she knows reacting to anything Balin might do or say might unravel it all in one go. She sighs and heaves Lesser into her arms. I suppose I'll take this little one for now then. Let you have some peace and quiet. Thank you, says Eleni, sounding relieved. And remember, whatever he does, whatever he says, don't react. I won't, promises Rayla, hitching a giggling Lesser onto her hip and stalking back into the crowd. Callum finds her by the balcony dancing with Lesser, the loose material of her dress swishing gently at her feet. She's pretty in the dim light, and if this is a glimpse of his future, then Callum decides that it's beautiful and bright and so worth whatever storm is coming their way. There you are, he says, grinning at them both. I thought you'd run off for a second. And leave you here to deal with all this by yourself. Rayla snorts into Lesser's hair. You wanna dance with Prince Callum, little one? Lesser puffs up her cheeks thoughtfully. Can't we all dance together? I think we can do that, laughs Callum. He puts his hand against Lesser's back and eases her little one out of Rayla's fingers to make room for his own. It's a bit awkward, but it makes Rayla smile, and that alone is more than enough reason to keep doing it. Are you okay? He adds quietly. Fine, mutters Rayla, adjusting her grip on Lesser. I'm just frustrated. Ah. Callum doesn't ask any more beyond that. He knows what's on her mind, so instead, he tugs her closer to lead her through a lazy waltz. They're dancing, all three of them, when they're interrupted a second time. It's Queen Anya of Duran this time, and she tilts her head curiously at Lesser as Callum and Rayla come to a stop. Who might this be? She asks. Queen Anya greets Callum, bowing. He takes Lesser from Rayla so she can curtsy a little easier. Your Majesty, this is Lesser, our friend's daughter. Say hi to Queen Anya, chicken. Lesser buries her face against his shoulder, golden eyes peering hesitantly at Queen Anya through the spaces of her fingers. She's not usually so shy, chuckles Callum. Are you enjoying the ball? I am, she says with a smile. She's always been one of the more open-minded monarchs of the Pentarchy. In some ways, she reminds Callum of Ezran, and when she studies them, she does so curiously. There's no animosity in her gaze, no distrust as she looks Rayla up and down. You look lovely, my lady, she adds. I hope you don't mind my asking, but, are the rumors true? Depends on what the rumors are, says Rayla dryly. What do you think, Your Majesty? Anya's lips twitch, amused. I think that you're both being very brave, she says quietly. Whether the rumors are true or not. I'd like to think that some of them might be. You're very good together, despite what certain generals might be saying. Of course, snorts Callum. Thank you, Your Majesty. That means a lot. Anya nods at them, her smile genuine. I wish you both the best. And I mean that. Enjoy your night. Your Majesty, calls Rayla, as she takes her leave. My apologies, but, if I might ask, what has General Balin been saying? Not anything nice, says Anya. He's been calling you a, she pauses. I'd really rather not say. If you ask me, he's been rather unprofessional about everything. I'd hate to have someone like him on my council. I hope Ezran finds a reason to replace him. Don't we all, scoffs Rayla. Have a good evening, Your Majesty. X. Rayla makes a beeline for Soren and Claudia almost as soon as the conversation is over, only vaguely aware of the way Callum trails after her with Lesser in his arms. Spill it, she snaps when she finds them. What, exactly, has Balin been telling people? What's he calling me behind my back? Claudia blanches. The people that matter don't believe any of it, she says quickly. And those that do, well, there was always going to be some resistance, but... Claudia. He's been calling you a whore, Soren tells her. He looks resigned, and he leans heavily on his cane as he says it, his old armor glinting weakly in the orange light. Sorry, he adds. He's trying to convince people that you seduced Callum. Apparently people saw him finding moon tea for you the other day. I mean, what a load of bull, right? She must have a tell or something, or maybe Callum does. But the next thing she knows is Claudia gasping behind her hands, and if she wasn't blushing at the idea of being caught out, she definitely is now. She's not even really sure why she's surprised. She'd been certain, that day, that there was no way Balin wouldn't find out, but knowing for sure is different entirely. You didn't. Does it matter, hisses Rayla. She glances around the ballroom and spots him standing in the corner by the band, watching them with a smirk and a raised wine glass. I'm going to kill him. Rayla. Callum steps in her way, Lesser at his knees clutching his fingers. Rayla, it's not worth it. Oh, I really think it will be. Rayla. He glances at Claudia and Soren for help, or for them to at least take Lesser for a minute so he might be able to keep her from rising to Balin's taunts. He's angry too, she can see it, but at this moment in time, his concern is for her. He's baiting you, Rayla, come on. She scowls at him. What, is it supposed to be like this forever, she snaps. People like Balin are going to insult me at every opportunity and I'm just supposed to grin and bear it. I'm running out of patience for this, Callum, you can't seriously expect me to take this lying down. I expect you to trust me, mutters Callum. That's all. His hands come to rest on her shoulders, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles into her skin in a bid to soothe her anger. He wants you to react to this. Do not give him that satisfaction. It's not worth it. Anyone that matters doesn't care, Rayla adds Claudia quietly. The other monarchs of the Pentarchy agree more with Ezran than they do with him, and he's too much of a coward to actually approach the elves that are even here. He's relying on rumors, and on you reacting to those rumors to get his way. You know that. Rayla does. It's a game to him, and she keeps Eleni's words in her mind as she wills herself to keep her calm. Don't rise to it, she tells herself. Don't rise to it. Don't rise to it. You're right, she mutters finally. You both are. I just need some air. She turns on her heel without another word and storms away before they can stop her. There's gotta be something we can do to shut him up, mutters Claudia darkly. She's one more insult away from rightfully attacking him, but if she does, she'll be playing right into his hands. Callum groans because she's right, but he's been around court politics long enough to know that they don't have a lot of options. She has every reason to be mad and more, and he worries a little that Rayla's fears might have some substance to them. She's not made to sit still and look pretty by his side, she's made for action, and if their marriage removes her agency and her ability to act, he'd rather not be married at all, only that's playing into Balin's hands too. I'll go and talk to her, he grumbles. It's all he can do, really. Just mention it to Ezran, if you can find him. And if you hear anything else, shut it down. You got it, Step Prince, says Soren, offering him a mock salute. He ushers Lesser back to him and steps backwards into the crowd. Good luck with your fiancé, feels like you might need it. He spots her on the balcony. Lesser, he whispers, crouching over. He draws a rune in the air, Lesser's eyes alight with wonder as he does so, and conjures a moon lily in his hands. You wanna give that to Lady Rayla? I think she could use some cheering up. Lesser nods eagerly, taking the lily by the stem with tiny fingers. She toddles off, happy to be helping in whatever way she can, and Callum watches her, waits until she presents it to Rayla with a flourish, and until Rayla's smiling again before he joins them out on the balcony. He relishes the cool air as it settles in his lungs. It's a relief to be out here, away from prying eyes and distasteful gossip. He can only imagine how it must feel for her. I'm sorry about all this, he mutters, leaning back against the railing. We don't have to do it, you know. There's still time to back out. I'm not backing out, says Rayla sourly. I'm just tired. You seem a little more than that. Callum hops up to sit against the railing and lifts a hand to brush a stray lock of silver out of her eyes. Their violet is brighter out here, there's a vibrance in them that really only shows in the moonlight, but it makes it easier to see the trouble in them too. On her other side, Lesser stands up on her toes to peer over the balcony railing, and Rayla sets an absent hand on her head to keep an eye on her without having to look. I wish I could do something, she admits at last. Because if I do nothing, Balin wins, and if I rise to it, he wins, and if I back out, he wins. He's definitely smarter than we gave him credit for, I'll give him that. Callum scowls to himself, because watching people insult her and talk about her behind her back and knowing she can't do anything about it is just as frustrating to him. It's pathetic. She's an easy target here, an elf thrown into the deep end of human politics, and while he does get, arguably, worse in Xadia, at least there, he can do something about it. Here, she's forced to sit and listen to it because anything she does in a human court might start another war. He heaves a sigh. It's just a different way of fighting, Rayla, he says finally. That's what court politics are. It's just sneakier. Well, for the record, it's awful, she mutters. But I can deal with it. I've dealt with worse. You have, says Callum, smiling at her. We'll think of a way to get him back. We will. We just have to be patient about it. He eases the lily from her fingers and tucks it behind her ear, grinning at the way she giggles as his fingers brush against her face. What do you say to one more dance? I'd like to have at least one with you without being interrupted. With me too, Prince Callum, pipes Lesser. Callum laughs. Of course. We'd never forget you. He ducks around to Rayla's other side, hoisting Lesser into his arms with a grin. What do you think, Rayla? One more dance with me and this sweet little chicken. Rayla lets out a little chuckle, her eyes considerably less strained as she takes Callum's hand. One more, she says, as he tugs her to him. He counts them into a real waltz this time, enjoying the way Rayla laughs as he twirls her, and the way Lesser giggles she twirls him too, and she's feeling a lot better, he thinks, when he considers interrupting them himself when remembers the ring in his pocket. He doesn't get the chance though, because Ezran strides through the balcony doors with nervous grin on his face to interrupt them instead. Are you guys ready? He asks. Callum catches the hesitation flash in Rayla's eyes, and, to be quite frank, no, he's not ready yet, and between this and facing the crowd, he'd much rather just keep dancing with Rayla. He shakes his head at his brother. Not yet, he says stubbornly. We're busy. EZ's lips twitch. Right, he says, a gentle smile on his features. Lesser, you wanna go and find your mom? Lesser nods eagerly, struggling out of Callum's arms as he sets her down. Ezran takes her tiny hand in his and grins at them. Don't be too long, okay, he says. It's almost time. He and Lesser disappear into the ballroom once more, and Callum sucks in a breath, determined to enjoy their last moments of peace and quiet before Ez makes the announcement and their privacy is ruined forever. Almost time. The words make him nervous, and Callum loses track of the beats of their waltz until they are just swaying together on the spot. Last chance, he murmurs, their faces close. We still have time. I'm not backing out. Her voice is firm as she ducks forward to press a quick kiss onto his lips. I'm with you. No matter what. He nods, taking in one last breath with her before she pulls away. Even the balcony doors look daunting to him now, but he squeezes Rayla's hand, and together, they step back into the light. Ez is already on the dais when they get there. He grins when he spots them, before he raises his goblet and clinks a spoon against the glass. The sound rings through the ballroom, and the chatter dies away only to be replaced by the sound of Callum's heart hammering away in his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, Ez says to the crowd, friends from Zadia, I have an announcement, although, from what I've heard, most of you already know. The buzz ceases entirely, and Rayla's fingers grip his tighter as her breath hitches in her throat. Regardless, it is my utmost pleasure to announce the engagement of my brother, Prince Callum, to the esteemed Ba. Ezran blinks, and the crowd parts as Balan storms into the center of the room. He looks outraged, but Callum can see the smirk in his eyes from all the way over here. Beside him, Rayla shuts her eyes tight, her fingers clutching his own even tighter still. This is a farce. Don't rise to it, Rayla murmurs to herself. Don't rise to it, don't rise to it. Your Majesty, says Balan. I ask you before this gathering, I implore you, do not proceed with this. Do not allow your brother to marry that elven whore. That's enough, Balan says as sharply, but even as Aunt Amaya makes a move towards him, but Balan holds out a hand. I will not be silenced, he snarls. The elf seduced your brother into her bed, and gave him no choice, but you can stop this, my king. That whore has no place here. That's enough, Balan says as again. On the other side of the ballroom, the present elves look varying shades of disgusted and offended, but Balan's still not done. My king, allow this, and you open your city to more of them. Imagine, a human city overrun with elves and their spawn, and their half-human spawn, like that abomination of a child that whore has been toting around all night. This cannot occur. Your brother cannot marry that slut. Something within Callum snaps, and at the same time, he comes to a realization. Rayla can't do anything about this because an elf attacking a human general of such high ranking might undo all their hard work. But Callum's human, and a human shutting down another human on behalf of an elf is a different thing altogether. It happens in slow motion. He releases Rayla's hand, only vaguely registering the sound of her voice calling after him, strides across the ballroom with echoing, purposeful steps, and the next thing he knows is his fist making contact with Balan's face. The silence that follows is immediate. Balan crumples to the ground. Pain shoots up his arm, his knuckles split, and Callum wrings his hand, blood running down his fist as he huffs. Gods, that felt good. At Ezran's other side, Aunt Amaya and Commander Gren stumble a little as they step off the dais, lifting Balan up by the pits of his arms as he stirs. Aunt Amaya gives him an impressed smirk as they drag him away, and when Rayla appears in his vision, she's at his side, fretting over the blood on his knuckles. The crowd is still staring, stunned, and Callum shushes her and presses a kiss to the back of her hand. Sorry for the interruption, Ez. Do you just want to take it from there? Ezran offers weakly. Callum shrugs, adrenaline coursing through his system. Rayla and I are getting married, he says to their guests. Some of you may not agree with it, but, honestly, we don't care. I love her. She loves me. We think this is what's best for us and for our two nations. Thank you and good night. His sense returns to him as he waves. His fist feels like it's on fire now, and there's blood on his slacks and on his sleeves and on Rayla's hands. Then he realizes there's applause. It's still a little stunned, but it's coming from both sides of the ballroom. He flushes. Beside him, Rayla flushes too, and together, they wave awkwardly as she ushers him back towards the balcony to take care of his hand. Sorry about him, he mutters, when they get outside at last. He drops onto the stone bench in the corner with a sigh. Sorry about not doing anything about it earlier. Ow, that hurts a lot now. Don't be such a baby, says Rayla. She still sort of looks like she can't believe what she saw, but the smile on her lips is impressed. She grimaces at the gash on his fist, though he'd probably nicked it on Balan's teeth or something, before she tears the end off her attached cape and she wraps the bit of material around his knuckles. You've taken harder hits than that. I don't think I've personally hit harder than that, though, mutters Callum, wincing as she puts pressure on his fist. And they say chivalry is dead. It most certainly isn't, laughs Rayla. Not after that display. I mean, you shouldn't have done it. Yes, I should have. Callum. He shakes his head. He had it coming, he says firmly. You're gonna be a princess, Rayla, no one gets to talk about you, or to you like that. No one gets to talk about you like that even if you weren't about to be a princess. You can't tell me he didn't deserve it. He grins at her, pleased with his work. I should have done it earlier. Here's the best part, though, you know who else saw that? Everybody in the bloody ballroom. Everybody in the bloody ballroom. Callum's grin grows wider. Me, a human, punching another human in the face on behalf of you, an elf. That's gotta be worth some points, right? And it should, theoretically, make it clear to everyone here that there's more to this than politics. He kisses her knuckles. Oh, and just to make it clear between us, he reaches into his pocket, grimacing as he goes, and fishes his mother's ring box from it. I meant to give this to you earlier, but it's been a busy night. I don't know how elves do this, but the way humans do it, I'm supposed to give you a ring. This was my mom's. Rayla stares at him, lips parted. She's forgotten how to breathe. Callum, she manages. I can't accept that. He chuckles, sliding off the stone bench and onto one knee, bandaged hand proffering the box to her. I thought you might say that, but Ez and I have agreed. It's yours now, if you'll have me. Are you seriously asking me to marry you with your mother's ring immediately after you punched someone in the face? You said it yourself, he says pointedly. Chivalry isn't dead. She laughs, giddy and blushing under the moonlight, even as she takes the box from him to run a finger over the front of his mother's ring. I mean, she giggles. You have to know how ridiculous this looks. Which finger would I even wear it on? The last one, I think, he says. It's the same finger as ours, you just don't have the fifth one. Do you wanna put it on? She nods, words caught in her throat. Do you want to do it for me? His grin widens still, and he takes her left hand in his and slips it on with a kiss. Just to be clear, is that a yes? She laughs, hiding her face with her other hand, looking as if she doesn't know if she wants to laugh or cry. Yes, dummy. That's a yes. X. Just before they leave for Xadia, Ezran summons them to the throne room to listen in on a hearing. It'll be quick, he promises. 10 minutes at the most. Then you guys can go. They agree, because technically they can leave whenever they want. Rayla's taking Vorobei, and Ezran had told Callum that he's more than welcome to take that mare he likes now that he's more confident on a horse. Kuritsa, he's told her name is, so the journey into Xadia this time around will be quicker and easier and there's much less of a rush. They take their places by him with a shrug, Callum and Rayla on Ezran's right, Aunt Amaya on his left, and when the doors swing open, they find themselves blinking at the sight of Balan, bruised eye, bandaged nose, and flanked on either side by two of Ezran's personal crown guard. General Balan says, his voice stony and regal. Over the last 2 weeks, you undermined my authority, summoned my Aunt Amaya without my knowledge or consent, repeatedly approached and offended an elven emissary even after you were warned not to, disclosed information privy only to the royal family to a ballroom full of guests, and tried to disgrace and humiliate the future princess of Katolis. How do you plead? Balan scowls at them, all of them, his head held high even as they look down on him from the dais. I was only doing what I believed was best for Katolis, he mutters. What's best for Katolis is not your decision to make, says Ez. Have you anything else to say for your actions? Balan pauses, but he eyes Callum carefully and ducks his head. No, your majesty. Good. Ezran smirks. You are dismissed from the council. You are stripped of any and all titles you hold. You may keep your pension, but under the condition that I don't see you within my castle again. My Aunt Amaya will serve in your place until I can find a new head of the Katolan army. You may go. Balan pales, and he surges forward, only for the soldiers on either side of him to yank him back onto his knees. But, your majesty. You're lucky that's all, says Ezran shortly. You may go. He catches Callum and Rayla's eye from the corner of his and grins. We have a wedding to plan. Notes. One last after this, team. Thank you so much for putting up with me and getting me this far. I'm so excited to end this thing once and for all. Chapter 23. Summary. It's a small ceremony, all things considered. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 23. 1 year later. It's a small ceremony, all things considered. Ez thinks that, if it were up to them, they'd have one smaller still, just the two of them and their closest friends and what's left of both their families, but it's not such a good look for the Prince of Katolis and their first elven princess to steal away in the night and marry in secret. Their union is enough of a talking point as is, and they're ambassadors before they're anything else. He'd much rather they didn't have to deal with that sort of gossip at treaty signings and negotiations. He stands by his brother as they say their vows. Opalai binds their hands. They kiss, and that's that. They leave the whole of ceremonies as husband and wife, their smiles wide and their hands linked, even as Ezran presents them to the city for the first time as Prince and Princess of Katolis. There's nothing but joy out there today. Relations between the Pentachi and Zadia are better than they've been in millennia. There are elves living happily in Katolis now, and there are humans being offered scholarships to study magic in the Zadian cities closest to the border. He won't kid himself, there's still resistance to this, to the idea that elves and humans might be able to live together in peace, and it took the better part of 4 years to even get this far, but the fact that they are here at all is an honest miracle, and Ez has Callum and Rayla to thank for that. He hopes they know how much of a difference they've made. Most of all, he hopes they are happy. X. Well, Ez, you did it, says Callum later. The evening is winding down, and the guests that are left are yawning in their chairs and drinking the last of their wine. It's been a good night, and Callum is a little flushed from probably one too many glasses of alcohol, but he's still smiling stupidly at his now wife who's laughing with her uncles and Commander Gren 2 tables down. I didn't do much, admits Ezran. Most of this was you two. There's no way we could have gotten this many elves and humans together in the same room if you and Rayla weren't here to show them how. Arguably, the people in this room already knew how, Callum says. And in any case, we probably wouldn't be here if you hadn't decided to arrange our marriage. There was no obligation to actually do it, says Ez pointedly. You had every opportunity to back out, but you did it anyway. You chose this, and by doing it, the two of you became this example of everything the world should be. The future's going to be amazing. You guys should be proud. Again snorts Callum. Your idea. But I'll take some of that credit, if you're really that eager to share. Ezran laughs at him, and he sips at his own glass and grimaces at the taste. Wine takes some getting used to, he thinks, and he probably shouldn't be drinking any of it at all, being so young, but it's within the spirit of things and a couple of sips won't hurt. Don't really get why anyone drinks this stuff, he mutters aloud though. It's a little bracing. It's an acquired taste, chuckles Callum. Don't feel too bad. Rayla's not drinking it either. Why not? Callum pauses, his lips pressed together like he'd said something he wasn't supposed to. He stares down at his drink for the longest time while Ez puts the pieces together in his head. His eyes widen. His gut lurches. His lips pull into a grin so wide it hurts his face. Shut up. I didn't say anything, mumbles Callum, although he's still staring at his drink like he's been caught red-handed with his hand on a tray of jelly tarts. Who else knows? There's nothing to know. Are you seriously telling me that if I went up to her right now and said, "Don't"? There's panic in Callum's voice, and he's about twice as red as he was when they started this conversation that there's literally no other way to interpret the answer. Callum's so flustered by it that Ezran has to take a second to make sure he doesn't start laughing in his brother's face. It's hardly conventional, but then, nothing about them is, and in some ways, he's not so surprised. He glances from Callum to Rayla and back again, watching the way his brother's eyes soften at the sight of her, before he pats Callum's shoulder and raises his glass. To you and Rayla, then, he says happily. Callum pauses. He studies his brother carefully, almost suspicious, but Ezran watches his eyes flit to Rayla once more, and in the end, he clinks his goblet against his with a smile. To the future. The end. The end.